Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Cole Preston, and I should have forgotten the case of Emily Rose Parker, but something brought me back to that cursed forest. 3 months had passed since that 22-year-old college student vanished without a trace from the Cascade Mountain National Forest, and every logical part of my rookie ranger brain told me to let it go. The official search had been called off after 6 weeks. The family had hired private investigators who found nothing. Hell, even Emily's parents had stopped calling the station daily. But last night my phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m. with a text that made my blood freeze. "She's waiting at the big top, Cole. Come find her before the show ends forever." The number showed up as Emily's cell phone. The same phone that had been found dead and waterlogged at the bottom of Mirror Lake 2 months ago. I should have deleted that message. Should have convinced myself it was some sick prank. Instead, I found myself loading my gear bag at dawn, checking my Motorola radio for the 15th time, and driving the winding Forest Service road toward Sector 7, where Emily had last been seen alive. The October morning mist clung to the Douglas firs like funeral shrouds as I parked at the Trail 49 staging area. My hands shook slightly as I clipped my GPS unit to my vest, a nervous habit I'd developed during my first year on the job. At 26, I was still the newest ranger at Cascade Mountain, still trying to prove I belonged among the veterans who'd been working these forests since before I was born. Unit 23 to dispatch. I spoke into my radio, my voice steadier than I felt. Beginning follow-up investigation at Emily Rose Parker, LKP. GPS coordinates 47.7211 again, 121.1531 W. Static crackled back at me. Nothing unusual there. Communication was always spotty in the deeper sections of forest, but something about the white noise made my skin crawl, like whispers hidden just below the range of human hearing. The trail Emily had taken that July afternoon was one I'd walked dozens of times during the initial search. She'd been photographing wildflowers for her botany thesis, her Honda Civic found empty in this exact parking lot with her purse and wallet still inside. The only thing missing had been Emily herself and her camera equipment. I shouldered my pack, 43 pounds of rescue gear, first aid supplies, rope, and emergency rations, and started down the familiar path. The weight felt reassuring against my back, a tangible reminder of my training and purpose. My Danner boots found their rhythm on the packed earth, muscle memory guiding me even as my mind churned with questions I couldn't answer. 20 minutes into the hike, my smartphone's GPS started acting up. The blue dot that marked my position kept jumping erratically across the screen, showing me in impossible locations, sometimes a mile east of my actual position, sometimes floating in the middle of Mirror Lake. I tapped the screen, thinking it was a software glitch, but the erratic behavior only worsened. "Probably just the tree cover," I muttered, but my voice sounded thin in the morning air. I'd never had GPS problems this severe in these particular coordinates before. The temperature dropped suddenly, maybe 15 degrees in the span of 30 seconds. My breath began to mist and I could feel goosebumps rising along my forearms beneath my long-sleeved uniform shirt. October in the Cascades could be unpredictable, but this felt wrong. Too sudden, too localized. I pulled out my weather radio to check conditions but got nothing but static punctuated by what almost sounded like distant carnival music. I stopped walking, straining my ears. Silence. Just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant call of a Stellar's jay. But for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard calliope music drifting through the trees like smoke. My radio crackled to life. "Unit 23, this is dispatch. What's your current status?" I keyed the mic, grateful for the human contact. "Unit 23 to dispatch. I'm experiencing some equipment malfunctions. GPS is showing incorrect positioning, and I'm getting strange interference on weatherband." The response came back garbled. Susan's familiar voice distorted into something that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Unit 20. Can't copy. Repeat your..." Something about circus. Cole, stay away from... Then nothing. Dead air. I tried raising dispatch 3 more times, adjusting frequencies and checking my battery level, but got only silence. My phone showed no signal bars despite being in an area where I'd had full coverage just hours earlier. The isolation hit me like a physical weight. I was completely cut off from the outside world, alone in the same forest where Emily Rose Parker had vanished without a trace. Forcing myself to focus on protocols, I consulted my paper map and compass. Old-school navigation had been drilled into us during training. Technology fails, but the basics never do. According to my calculations, I was approaching the meadow where Emily's backpack had been found, the only piece of evidence recovered during the entire investigation. As I crested a small ridge, the trees opened into the familiar clearing. Chest-high grass swayed in a breeze I couldn't feel, and wildflowers painted the meadow in impossible autumn colors, vibrant reds and golds that seemed to glow with their own inner light. This was where Emily had been photographing, where her academic dreams had ended in mystery. But something was different. In the center of the meadow, where there had never been anything but grass and flowers, stood a weathered wooden stake driven into the earth. Colorful fabric strips fluttered from its top like prayer flags, and carved into the wood in shaky letters were the words, Marvelo's Midnight Circus, October 31st, 1923. My mouth went dry. I approached the marker slowly, every instinct screaming danger. This hadn't been here during any of our previous searches. I would have remembered something this obvious. The wood looked ancient, weathered by decades of mountain storms, but the carved letters seemed fresh, as if someone had just finished the inscription. I photographed the marker with my camera, the flash seeming unnaturally bright in the growing gloom. When I checked the image on the LCD screen, my blood went cold. In the photo, the stake appeared to be surrounded by the ghostly outlines of carnival tents, visible only in the digital capture. And there, standing at the edge of the phantom big top, was the unmistakable silhouette of a young woman with long, dark hair. Emily. My hands started shaking as I took 3 more photos in rapid succession. Each image showed more detail of the spectral circus, striped tents, elaborate banners, carousel horses frozen mid-gallop. And in every single photograph, Emily Rose Parker stood watching me with eyes that reflected the camera flash like mirrors. But when I looked up from the camera, I saw only empty meadow. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Cole Preston's situation? Comment below. The rational part of my mind, the part trained in search and rescue protocols and evidence preservation, told me to document everything and call for backup. But my radio remained dead, my phone useless, and the October sky was darkening with unnatural speed despite being barely past noon. I needed to find higher ground, get to a position where I could re-establish communication. The old fire tower on Owl's Peak was only 2 miles northeast, and its radio repeater might cut through whatever interference was jamming my equipment. But that meant leaving the meadow, leaving the last place I'd seen evidence of Emily. As I turned to go, fog began rolling into the clearing from all directions simultaneously. Not normal mountain mist, but thick gray walls that moved with purpose, cutting off escape routes one by one. The temperature plummeted another 20 degrees, and my breath came in sharp white puffs that hung in the air longer than physics should allow. And then I heard it clearly. Calliope music drifting through the fog like a lullaby from hell. The music was wrong in every way possible. The melody was beautiful but alien, featuring notes that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my bones. It spoke of cotton candy and painted smiles, but underneath lurked something hungry and patient and utterly inhuman. Through the thickening fog, lights began to appear. Not the warm yellow glow of lanterns or the harsh white of electric bulbs, but something that shifted between colors that didn't have names. The lights pulsed in rhythm with the impossible music, and with each pulse the circus became more real. I could make out tent shapes now, towering canvas structures that seemed to stretch impossibly high into the darkened sky. Banners fluttered in the fog. Marvelo's Midnight Circus, wonders beyond imagination. and see the girl who dances with shadows. A ticket booth materialized 15 feet away, its painted facade peeling and warped by decades of weather that shouldn't exist. My training kicked in despite the terror crawling up my spine. Document everything. Maintain situational awareness. Find the victim. I raised my camera and started taking photographs, the flash cutting through the supernatural fog like a knife. Each burst of light revealed more details. A carousel with horses that had human faces, a funhouse whose mirrors reflected things that weren't there, and everywhere the smell of sawdust and popcorn mixed with something else, something that reminded me of old graves. "Emily!" I called out, my voice swallowed by the fog. "Emily Rose Parker. This is Park Ranger Cole Preston. If you can hear me, call out." The calliope music stopped with mechanical abruptness, leaving only silence that felt like a held breath. Then, from somewhere deep within the spectral circus, I heard a voice I recognized from interviews with Emily's family and friends. "Cole? Is that really you? I've been waiting so long. They said someone would come. They promised someone would find me." Her voice was exactly as her mother had described it. Soft, melodious, with just a hint of the Pacific Northwest accent that marked her as a local girl. But something underneath the familiar tone made my skin crawl, like an actor reading lines from a script she'd never rehearsed. "Emily, where are you? Keep talking so I can find you." "I'm in the Big Top, Cole, but you have to buy a ticket first. That's the rule. You can't see the show without a ticket." I approached the ticket booth on legs that felt like rubber. Behind the grimy glass window sat an impossibly thin man in a striped vest and bowler hat. His face was painted in the exaggerated style of a circus clown, but the paint was cracked and peeling, revealing glimpses of something underneath that might have been human once. "One ticket, please," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The thing behind the glass smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "That'll be one memory, Ranger. Something precious. Something that makes you who you are." "I don't understand." "Oh, but you will." It leaned forward, and I caught a whiff of decay and cotton candy. "Perhaps the memory of your first successful rescue? Or maybe the day you decided to become a ranger. The circus needs payment, you see. We trade in experiences, in the moments that define a human soul." I thought of Emily, lost somewhere in this impossible place, waiting for rescue. I thought of her parents who'd never given up hope despite the official search being called off. I thought of my oath as a park ranger to protect and serve the public. "Take whatever you want," I said. "Just let me get her out of here." The creature's grin widened impossibly. It reached through the ticket window with fingers that were too long and too pale, touching my forehead with a sensation like ice water in my veins. For a moment my mind went completely blank, a yawning void where something important used to be. Then it passed, and I was holding a ticket made of what looked like dried flower petals. The words printed on it shifted and changed as I watched. "Admit one to the greatest show on Earth and below. The main tent is straight ahead," the thing said, settling back into its booth. "Enjoy the performance, and remember, the show must go on. It always goes on." I pocketed the ticket and walked deeper into the circus. Around me, the fog swirled with shapes that might have been people or might have been something else entirely. I caught glimpses of other attractions, a strong man bending bars that screamed like living things, a fortune teller whose crystal ball showed only darkness, a knife thrower whose target was always just out of clear sight. The Big Top loomed ahead, its red and white stripes seeming to pulse like a heartbeat. From inside came the sound of applause, hundreds of hands clapping in perfect unison, too perfect to be human. The entrance flap hung open like a mouth, and warm air poured out carrying the scent of sawdust and something else, something organic and sweet and wrong. I pushed through the entrance and immediately understood why no search team had ever found Emily Rose Parker. The interior of the tent was vast, larger than should have been physically possible given its external dimensions. Bleachers stretched up into darkness, filled with an audience of shadows and whispers. In the center ring, under lights that cast no shadows, Emily danced. But it wasn't Emily anymore, not entirely. She wore a costume of midnight blue sequins that caught the impossible light like stars, and her movements were too fluid, too perfect. She spun and leaped with inhuman grace, her feet never quite touching the sawdust floor. Her face was painted in theatrical makeup, but her eyes were the same warm brown I'd seen in all the missing person photographs. "Ladies and gentlemen," boomed a voice from everywhere and nowhere. "Presenting our star performer, the girl who dances between worlds. She's been with us for 96 years and counting." 96 years. Emily had been missing for 3 months. I started toward the ring, but invisible barriers kept me in the audience section. The shadows around me applauded with hollow hands, and I realized with growing horror that I was surrounded by decades of missing persons, hikers and campers who'd vanished in these mountains, all of them trapped in the eternal performance. "Emily," I shouted over the supernatural applause. "Emily, it's me. It's Cole Preston. I'm here to take you home." She stopped dancing and turned toward me. For a moment, her painted face showed confusion, as if she was trying to remember something important. Then recognition flickered in her eyes, and she smiled. Not the theatrical grin of a circus performer, but the real smile of a 22-year-old college student who'd been lost and afraid. "Cole?" Her voice cut through the circus noise like a prayer. "Is it really you? I've been trying to leave, but they won't let me. They say I signed a contract, but I don't remember signing anything. I'm getting you out of here." I stood up, causing murmurs of disapproval from the shadow audience. "Emily, we're leaving right now." But as I moved toward the ring, the circus erupted into chaos. The calliope music became a shriek of tortured metal. The lights strobed in patterns that hurt to look at, and from the ring came a voice that was definitely not Emily's. "She belongs to us now, Ranger. She feeds our performance with her youth and beauty and dreams. Without her, the show cannot go on, and the show must always go on." The thing wearing Emily's face smiled, but the expression was all wrong. Too wide, too knowing, too hungry. "But we're always looking for new talent. Stay with us, Cole. Dance with us forever. Your dedication, your sense of duty, your noble heart, what wonderful seasoning they would add to our eternal performance." I fumbled for my radio, hoping against hope that I could somehow call for backup, but the device crumbled to dust in my hands. My GPS unit followed, then my emergency beacon. The circus was consuming my tools one by one, cutting off my connections to the rational world. But I still had my camera. The flash. The camera flash had revealed the circus when everything else showed only empty meadow. Light, pure, artificial light, seemed to be the only thing that could cut through their illusions. I raised the camera and fired off every flash I had, turning the big top into a strobing nightmare of light and shadow. With each burst, the circus became a little less solid, a little more transparent. The shadow audience began to wail and dissipate, and the voice from the ring rose to an inhuman shriek. "Stop! You're destroying decades of careful work. The performance must continue." But I kept shooting, draining my camera's battery with rapid-fire flashes. In the strobing light, I could see Emily fighting against invisible restraints, her real personality struggling against the circus's influence. The painted makeup began to run down her face like tears, revealing the frightened college student underneath. "Cole!" she screamed. "I can move! I can move again!" She ran toward me as the big top began to collapse around us, its reality failing under the assault of photographic light. But we weren't fast enough. The entrance was sealing itself, trapping us inside a failing supernatural construct. That's when I remembered my backup plan. Every ranger carried emergency flares for nighttime rescues, and I had 3 phosphorus road flares clipped to my belt. If camera flashes could disrupt the circus, sustained artificial light might destroy it entirely. I pulled the pin on the first flare and threw it into the center ring. Brilliant red fire erupted in a fountain of sparks, and the entire tent began to scream. The second flare went toward the entrance, clearing a path through the collapsing illusion. The third I kept in my hand as Emily reached me, her eyes now completely clear and human. "Run!" I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the red-lit exit. "Don't look back, just run!" We burst through the tent flap into fog that was already beginning to dissipate. Behind us, the entire circus was coming apart like wet paper. 96 years of supernatural construction unraveling in minutes. The calliope music became a death rattle, then silence. Emily collapsed in the meadow grass, sobbing with relief and confusion. "I thought I'd been here for days," she gasped. "But they kept saying it was decades, centuries. Time didn't work right. Nothing worked right." I wrapped her in my emergency blanket and checked her vitals. Aside from dehydration and exhaustion, she seemed physically unharmed. But her eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen things that shouldn't exist. "We need to get you to a hospital," I said, pulling out my spare radio, an old analog unit that wasn't vulnerable to digital interference. "Unit 23 to dispatch, emergency medical evacuation needed at Emily Rose Parker, LKP. I have the victim, alive and responsive." Susan's voice came back clear and strong. "Unit 23, confirm you said you have Emily Parker. She's been missing for 3 months. Confirmed, dispatch. Long story. We need immediate medical support and extraction from Trail 49. As we waited for the helicopter, Emily told me fragments of her experience, time distortions, endless performances, and the growing realization that she was trapped in something that fed on human creativity and hope. Most of it sounded impossible, but I'd seen enough to believe every word. "Cole," she said as the rescue helicopter's rotors beat the air overhead. "How did you know to come back? The case was closed." I thought about the text message, about the impossible photographs, about the ticket booth creature that had stolen something precious from my mind. I still couldn't remember what I'd traded away, but somehow it felt worth the price. "Someone told me you were waiting," I said simply. "Someone said I needed to find you before the show ended forever." Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Emily Rose Parker. I read every single one. Epilogue. 6 months later, Emily Rose Parker graduated summa cum laude with her botany degree and moved to Portland to work for the Forest Service. She never spoke publicly about her experience in the circus, but sometimes she sent me photographs, always taken with film cameras, never digital. I kept working Sector 7, despite several offers to transfer to other districts. Hikers still go missing in the Cascade Mountains, and sometimes, on foggy October nights when the temperature drops suddenly and electronics start to malfunction, I hear calliope music drifting through the trees. The circus is still out there, somewhere between reality and nightmare, waiting for the next performance. But now I know its weakness, and I carry enough flares to light up half the mountain. Because somebody has to watch for the lost ones. Somebody has to listen for the music that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very prepared, you can bring them home. My name is Cole Preston, and I'm no longer a rookie ranger. Some lessons can only be learned in the dark, and some rescues require more than just rope and first aid training. But that's a story for another night, when the fog rolls in and the temperature drops and somewhere in the distance, a calliope begins to play. My name is Jordan Mitchell, and the last message from Amber Richardson still echoes in my radio. "Please, something's making me play cards. The man in the suit says if I lose..." Then nothing but static filled with sounds that shouldn't exist. Whispers in languages I'd never heard. The shuffle of cards that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. That was 43 minutes ago. 43 minutes since my academic world of rational explanations and peer-reviewed research crumbled like ancient parchment. I'm a search and rescue specialist for Great Smoky Mountains National Park. But that's not how I started. Dr. Jordan Mitchell, they used to call me, professor of regional history at the University of Tennessee. I spent 15 years in lecture halls teaching students about Appalachian folklore while secretly dismissing most of it as superstition. The irony tastes like copper pennies in my mouth now. My radio crackles. "Unit 47, this is base. What's your 20 on the Richardson search?" I check my GPS coordinates. 35.6532 degree N, 83.4681 degree W. Deep in the Cataract Falls Trail system, where cell towers can't reach, and the October mist clings to everything like desperate fingers. Base, this is Mitchell. Grid reference 347891, approximately 2 clicks southeast of Cataract Falls, still tracking the victim's last known position. But I don't tell them about the message. How could I? Hey base, the missing hiker just radioed that someone's forcing her to play cards in the middle of the wilderness. They'd pull me off the case faster than you could say psychological evaluation. The autumn air cuts through my ranger jacket, carrying scents that trigger my trained senses. Decomposing leaves, the metallic taste of approaching rain, and something else. Something that makes my academic brain scramble for logical explanations, even as my ranger instincts scream warnings. It smells like old tobacco and stale whiskey. Impossible in this pristine wilderness. My equipment inventory runs through my head like a survival checklist. Garmin GPS, battery at 73%, Motorola radio, spare battery pack in my left cargo pocket, Streamlight tactical flashlight, first aid kit, emergency bivvy, water purification tablets, and 1.2 liters of water. My Samsung Galaxy S9 shows 1 bar of service that flickers in and out like a dying candle. The temperatures dropped 6 degrees in the last hour, unusual for October in the Smokies. Amber Richardson, 22 years old, University of Tennessee senior majoring in Appalachian Studies. Her mother's voice from this morning's briefing haunts me. She was researching local legends for her thesis, something about gambling houses in the mountains during the 1940s. She said she'd found evidence of an actual place up near. Mrs. Richardson's voice had broken then, the way voices do when hope and terror collide. My boots, Danner Mountain 600s with Vibram soles, find purchase on the slick leaves covering the trail. Each step releases the earthy perfume of decay that should comfort me after 23 years in these mountains. Instead, it feels like walking on a carpet of graves. The trail splits ahead. My GPS shows both paths as official park routes, but something's wrong. The left fork descends toward Ramsey Cascades exactly where it should. The right fork shouldn't exist. It's not on any map I've studied, not in 15 years of academic research or 8 years of ranger service. Yet there it is, clear as the compass in my hand, winding up into a section of forest that my topographical maps show as impassable terrain. My radio hisses with static. Then, impossibly, Amber's voice cuts through. "Jordan, can you hear me?" He says you have to come play too. He's been waiting since 1943. The transmission cuts to static that sounds like shuffling cards and distant jazz music. My hands shake as I key the mic. Amber, this is Ranger Mitchell. What's your position? Who are you with? Nothing but white noise that somehow carries the ghost of laughter. The temperature drops another 5 degrees. My breath mists in the air, and frost begins forming on the radio antenna. In October, at 68 degrees. I should call this in. Protocol demands it, but what would I say? That I'm receiving impossible radio transmissions from a missing person who's apparently been forced into a card game by someone claiming to have waited since 1943? Base would order me back immediately, and Amber would be lost to whatever nightmare has claimed her. My academic mind catalogs the impossibilities, radio transmissions from unknown locations, temperature anomalies, trails that don't exist on any survey. But my ranger training focuses on the only fact that matters. A young woman is in danger, and I'm her only hope of rescue. I choose the impossible trail. The path winds upward through hemlocks that shouldn't grow at this elevation, their branches forming a canopy so dense that afternoon light becomes a memory. My flashlight beam seems weaker here, as if the darkness actively consumes it. The LED display shows full battery, but the light barely penetrates 3 feet ahead. Every 10 minutes I stop to mark my position with reflective tape tied to tree branches. Standard search protocol, but the tape disappears behind me as if the forest swallows my breadcrumbs. When I check my GPS, the coordinates make no sense. 35.7429 degree N, 83.21 W. According to every map I know, I should be standing in the middle of a documented cave system, 30 feet underground. The trail levels onto a plateau that definitely doesn't exist. My altimeter reads 3,847 feet. Impossible in this section of the Smokies. Ahead, warm light flickers between the trees like campfire glow, accompanied by sounds that freeze my academic blood. The clink of poker chips, the snap of cards being dealt, and underneath it all a woman's voice counting, 21, 22, 23. Amber. I radio base one last time. Unit 47 to base. Investigating possible structure at coordinates. I check my GPS. The screen shows only static where numbers should be. Base, I'm going dark for tactical approach. If you don't hear from me in 2 hours, send back up to Cataract Falls Trail System. Copy that, Unit 47. Be safe out there, Mitchell. Safe. The word tastes like ash. I approach the light source with weapons drawn, not my service pistol, but the tools of an academic turned ranger. Observation, documentation, rational analysis. Except nothing about this situation submits to rational analysis. The structure that shouldn't exist sits in a clearing that violates every principle of forest ecology I learned in graduate school. It's a log cabin, but wrong in ways that make my eyes water when I try to focus on it. The logs appear simultaneously new and ancient, as if time flows differently here. Warm yellow light spills from windows that seem to shift position when I'm not looking directly at them. Through those impossible windows, I see her. Amber Richardson sits at a card table across from a man in a perfectly pressed 1940s suit. His hair is slicked back with pomade that gleams in the lamplight, and his smile reveals teeth too white and too sharp. Between them, poker chips stack in neat towers, some red, some blue, some a color that hurts to perceive. The man's voice carries clearly through walls that should muffle sound. Your ranger friend has arrived, my dear. Shall we invite him to join our game? I believe he has something I'd very much like to win. Amber's eyes meet mine through the window. Her lips move, but no sound emerges. Instead, her message comes through my radio, transmitted from impossible proximity. Jordan, don't come in, he's not human. He's been waiting here since 1943, playing games with anyone who finds this place. The stakes. Jordan, the stakes are our souls. The suited man turns toward the window and his eyes reflect the lamplight like a cat's. When he smiles, his face seems to stretch in directions that geometry shouldn't allow. Dr. Jordan Mitchell, he says, though his lips don't move. His voice comes from my radio, perfectly clear. Former professor of regional history, current search and rescue specialist, husband to Sarah, father to Emma and Michael. Age 47, blood type O negative, and most interestingly, a man who spent his entire career dismissing the very supernatural forces he now faces. My service weapon clears its holster before conscious thought processes the movement. Standard issue Glock 22, 15 rounds of .40 caliber ammunition. Completely inadequate against whatever waits in that cabin, but my ranger training overrides academic terror. My name is Vincent Carbone, the suited man continues through my radio. I was quite the gambler in my day. Poker, blackjack, craps, any game where skill meets chance. Unfortunately, I proved too skilled for my own good. In 1943, I made the mistake of winning too much from the wrong entity. So here's my eternal punishment. I'm bound to this place, forced to play games for the highest possible stakes with anyone unfortunate enough to find me. The cabin door swings open without anyone touching it. The rules are simple, Dr. Mitchell. We play 5-card draw poker, best 2 out of 3 hands. If you win, Miss Richardson goes free, and you both walk away with memories of nothing more than a successful rescue. If I win, his laugh sounds like bones rattling in a jar. If I win, your souls join my eternal game, and your bodies become my puppets for luring the next players to this table. My radio crackles with Amber's voice. Jordan, you don't understand. I've been here for 3 days, but my watch says only 2 hours have passed. Time doesn't work right in this place. And the cards, they're not normal cards. They show things, horrible things. Futures that might be, pasts that shouldn't exist. 3 days. The search has been active for less than 6 hours. Your cell phone battery is at 37%, Vincent's voice observes. Your radio has perhaps 90 minutes of life remaining. The temperature is dropping steadily. Unusual weather for October, wouldn't you say? And nightfall in these mountains brings complications, creatures that serve as my collectors for debts unpaid. As if summoned by his words, howls echo from the forest below. Not wolf howls, something closer to human screams filtered through animal throats. The game begins in 10 minutes, Vincent announces, whether you choose to participate or not. I key my radio one final time. Base, this is Unit 47, emergency situation, missing person located at coordinates unknown, requesting immediate backup and... I stop. How do you request backup for a supernatural poker game with a 1940s gambling demon? No signal will reach beyond this plateau, Vincent informs me pleasantly. This place exists in what you might call a pocket dimension. Your modern technology works after a fashion, but only within my domain. Consider it a courtesy. I could simply render all your equipment useless, but I appreciate the dramatic potential of your radio communications. My gear inventory runs through my head. Water for 12 hours, food for 6, batteries for 4. But if time works differently here, those numbers mean nothing. My Sunto watch shows 4:47 p.m., but the shadows through the windows suggest deep night. Jordan, Amber's voice pleads through the radio. I need to tell you something about my research. The gambling house I was investigating? It wasn't just local legend. Vincent Carbone was real. He owned an illegal casino in these mountains during World War II. Soldiers would come here to gamble away their pay before shipping overseas. In 1943, he challenged the wrong entity to a high-stakes game and lost. The entire casino was pulled into this place, where everyone gets to play forever, Vincent adds cheerfully. My collection includes a Union soldier from 1864, a Cherokee medicine man from 1838, 3 moonshiners from the 1920s, and now potentially a lovely graduate student and her rescuer. We're quite the diverse group. The howls grow closer. Through the trees, shapes move that don't conform to any taxonomy I studied in my academic career. They walk upright, but move like predators, and their eyes reflect the cabin's light in colors that have no names. Time's up, Dr. Mitchell. Enter the cabin and play, or my collectors will ensure you play anyway, just less intact. The Glock's weight provides no comfort. Bullets won't stop whatever waits in those trees. But maybe, just maybe, the rational mind that earned me a PhD can find an edge against supernatural evil. I holster my weapon and walk toward the door that opens onto impossible circumstances. My boots cross a threshold that feels like passing through ice water, and suddenly I'm inside a space larger than the cabin's exterior dimensions should contain. The interior combines 1940s casino elegance with nightmare aesthetics. Velvet wallpaper pulses with patterns that hurt to follow. Oil paintings hang in frames that seem to extend infinitely inward, showing scenes of previous games. Losers frozen at the moment of their defeat. Expressions of horror preserved in brushstrokes that move when I'm not watching. Vincent Carbone sits at a round table that might have been carved from a single piece of obsidian. The surface reflects light from chandeliers that cast shadows upward. Amber sits across from him, her hiking clothes replaced by a 1940s evening dress that shimmers like oil on water. Ah, the good doctor joins us at last, Vincent says, rising to offer a formal bow. Miss Richardson has been such delightful company, though I confess she lacks your educational background. Sit, please. Let me explain the rules. The chair pulls itself out as I approach. Sitting feels like accepting a death sentence, but Amber's eyes hold desperate hope that maybe, somehow, my academic training provides an advantage. 5-card draw poker, Vincent begins, dealing cards from a deck that seems to contain more than 52 pieces. Texas Hold'em is too modern for my tastes. We ante our souls. I've already claimed Miss Richardson's, so you're playing to win it back. Best 2 out of 3 hands determines the winner. The cards he deals burn cold against my fingers. Instead of traditional suits and numbers, they show images. A cemetery under a blood moon, a child's toy abandoned in snow, a door opening onto screaming darkness. But somehow I understand their values. The cemetery counts as a king, the toy as a 7, the door as an ace. Your academic mind is adapting quickly, Vincent observes. Excellent. That will make the game more interesting. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Jordan Mitchell's situation? Comment below. My first hand contains the Blood Moon Cemetery, King, a mirror reflecting nothing, Queen, a clock running backwards, Jack, burning books, 10, and a photograph of my family that tears itself apart as I watch, 2. A decent hand, but Vincent's smile suggests confidence. I'll take 2 cards, I announce, discarding the burning books and the family photo that reforms itself showing my wife and children's faces replaced by Vincent's grinning visage. The replacement cards show a ranger badge melting, Ace, and hiking boots filled with bone dust, Ace. 3 of a kind, Ace is high. Vincent takes 1 card, his expression never changing. Shall we reveal our hands, Doctor? I lay down my 3 aces. Vincent's cards form a straight flush of images I can't bear to describe, scenes of torture and despair in perfect ascending order. Round 1 to me, Vincent announces. Miss Richardson's soul sinks a bit deeper into my collection. Shall we continue? Amber's image flickers like a television losing signal. For a moment she becomes translucent, and I glimpse something else wearing her form, something with too many joints and eyes like burning coals. The second hand deals cards showing my memories. My wedding day, Ace. Emma's first steps, King. Michael's birth, Queen. My doctoral defense, Jack. The day I became a ranger, 10. A royal flush of my life's most precious moments. Vincent's hand shows my fears. Sarah dying alone, my children forgetting me, my ranger career ending in failure, my academic work dismissed as worthless, and finally, myself trapped in this cabin forever. A straight flush of psychological warfare. Interesting, Vincent muses. Your love beats my manipulation. Most players lead with fear. You lead with devotion. Round 2 is yours, Doctor. We're tied, 1 hand each. Amber becomes solid again, but the effort seems to cost her. Blood trickles from her nose as she mouths words I read as the deck and find the pattern. The final hand arrives, 5 cards that shift and writhe like living things. But as I study them, my academic training kicks in. Patterns emerge from chaos. These aren't random distributions. Vincent's been controlling the deck, but there's a system, a logic that follows statistical probability modified by supernatural influence. My hand shows a compass pointing to nowhere, 7. A trail marker covered in blood, 8. A rescue helicopter crashing, 9. My radio transmitting screams, 10. And finally, a card that makes my vision blur. Myself, older, grayer, standing in this same cabin dealing cards to new victims, Jack. A straight, but not the highest possible hand. Your final draw, Doctor. Choose wisely. This hand determines everything. Instead of drawing, I speak. Vincent, you've been cheating. Not with sleight of hand. That would be beneath a supernatural entity. You've been cheating with inevitability. Every hand is predetermined based on fear, hope, and psychological manipulation. But you made one mistake. His smile falters slightly. You assumed I'd play your game by your rules, but I'm not just a ranger or a professor, I'm both. And I've noticed something about this place. The temporal distortions, the spatial impossibilities, the way technology works intermittently. This isn't a pocket dimension. It's a psychological construct maintained by belief and powered by despair. I stand, cards still in hand. Amber's been here 3 days subjective time because she believes she has. My equipment works sporadically because I believe it should. And your power over us exists only because we believe we're trapped. Vincent's face begins to shift, revealing angles that shouldn't exist. Sit down, Doctor. Finish the game. No, I drop my cards onto the table, where they burst into flames that cast no heat. The game ends when I choose to stop playing. Amber, look at me. Remember who you are, where you came from, why you're researching Appalachian folklore. Remember that you're a rational person investigating legends, not living inside one. Amber's eyes clear. The evening dress dissolves, revealing her hiking clothes. Jordan, how did I was on the trail and I saw this cabin, and there was this man who said what people like him always say, I interrupt, that you had no choice, but you do. We both do. Vincent roars, and his form expands into something that hurts to perceive directly. You cannot simply leave. The rules demand nothing. I cut him off. You're Vincent Carbone, a gambling addict who died in 1943 and convinced himself his obsession was punishment rather than choice. You've been here 85 years playing the same game with yourself, using projections and psychological manipulation to create opponents. The cabin shudders. Through the windows, dawn light penetrates impossible architecture. Amber was never here for days. She's been missing for 6 hours, just like the official timeline. She got lost, found this place. Probably an old hunting cabin you've claimed. And your psychological influence made her believe she was trapped in a supernatural game. But belief is a choice, and we choose to stop believing. I grab Amber's hand and walk toward the door. Vincent screams behind us, but the sound grows fainter with each step. This is the real world, Amber. October 15th, 2018. Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I'm Ranger Jordan Mitchell, and I'm taking you home. The door opens onto familiar forest. My GPS shows normal coordinates, 35.6532 degree N, 83.4681 Quantic W. The trail marker beside us reads, Cataract Falls, 2.3 miles. Base, this is Unit 47, I radio. Missing person located and safe. Requesting medical evaluation and extraction at coordinates 35.6532 north, 83.44681 west. Copy that, Unit 47. Excellent work. Extraction team en route. Amber looks back at where the cabin stood. Nothing remains but normal forest, ancient hemlocks filtering October sunlight, the comfortable sounds of natural wilderness. Jordan, she whispers. Was any of that real? I check my equipment. Radio battery at normal levels. GPS functioning perfectly. Temperature steady at 68 degrees. My academic mind wants to dismiss everything as stress-induced hallucination, but my ranger instincts know better. Reality isn't binary, I tell her. Some things exist in the spaces between rational and irrational, natural and supernatural. What matters is that you're safe. But as we hike toward the extraction point, I can't shake the feeling that Vincent Carbone is still out there, waiting for the next person who believes strongly enough in old stories to make them true. Maybe that's his real punishment, not being trapped in a supernatural prison, but being trapped in the consequences of his own choices, forced to repeat the same patterns until someone shows him a different way. Or maybe I'm just a ranger with an academic background rationalizing 6 hours of shared psychological crisis. Either way, Amber Richardson is going home to her family, and I'll be back in time for dinner with mine. Sometimes, that's the only victory that matters. My radio crackles one final time. Thank you, Doctor. Vincent's voice, faint but clear. I had almost forgotten what choice felt like. Then silence, broken only by the sound of our boots on solid ground and the distant approach of the extraction helicopter. In my cargo pocket, 5 cards that shouldn't exist burn like ice against my fingers. I'll destroy them when I get home. But for now, they serve as a reminder. The line between legend and reality is thinner than most people believe. And sometimes the only thing standing between the two is the choice to walk away from the game. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Amber Richardson. I read every single one. My name is Connor Mitchell, and finding Sophia Williams's hiking boot wedged 20 feet up in an old-growth Douglas fir, with no climbing marks, no broken branches, and no fucking way any human could have put it there, was when I knew this wasn't a normal search and rescue. The boot dangled from a branch thick as my torso, laces still tied. the worn Merrill sole facing down like some twisted Christmas ornament. I'd been a ranger in Olympic National Park for 6 years, Army infantry for 8 before that, and I'd never seen evidence planted in a location that defied basic physics. I keyed my radio with hands that wanted to shake. "Base, this is Mitchell. I've got anomalous evidence at coordinates 478021 degree N, 123.604 DW. Need to speak with Chief Rodriguez immediately." Static crackled through the marine layer fog that had rolled in from the Pacific, turning the temperate rainforest into a cathedral of gray shadows. My GPS showed 2:47 p.m., but the light filtering through the canopy felt like twilight. "Copy that, Mitchell. Chief's with the Williams family. What kind of evidence?" I stared up at the boot, my tactical mind trying to process impossibilities. Victim's hiking boot, elevated position, no access route visible, requesting crime scene protocols. Sarah had kissed me goodbye this morning at 0500, her warm lips tasting like coffee and concern. "Find her safe, Connor," she'd whispered. 8-year-old Emma still sleeping in the next room. Her mom sounded so scared on the news. Now, 12 hours into the search for 23-year-old Sophia Williams, I was staring at evidence that made my combat-trained mind want to reject reality. The boot wasn't the only thing wrong. I'd been following what the Olympic Peninsula tribes called the Bone Trail, an unofficial path that paralleled the official Thunder Creek Trail, but wound deeper into the temperate rainforest where few tourists ventured. The undergrowth here was dense with sword ferns and devil's club, the ground soft with centuries of fallen needles. No footprints, no broken vegetation, no sign Sophia had ever walked this direction. But her boot was 20 feet above my head. My pack weighed 42 pounds, rope, climbing gear, first aid, emergency shelter, 3 days of MREs, 4 liters of water, headlamp, backup flashlight, flares, and my service weapon, a Glock 22 with 2 spare magazines. Military habits die hard. I'd rather carry too much than need something I didn't have. The problem was none of my gear explained how a 120-pound college student got her boot into that tree. I unclipped my climbing rope and harness. If the boot was evidence, I needed to document it properly. But as I rigged my ascender system, the forest around me went silent. Not quiet, silent. No bird calls, no insect buzz, no wind through the canopy. Even the distant sound of Thunder Creek had vanished, leaving only the rasp of my breathing and the metallic click of carabiners. In Kandahar, that kind of silence meant snipers. I froze, scanning the tree line with eyes trained to spot movement. The fog had thickened, reducing visibility to maybe 30 yards. Ancient cedars and firs disappeared into gray nothing, their massive trunks like prison bars in the murk. Something moved in my peripheral vision. I spun, hand dropping to my Glock, and saw nothing. Just fog swirling between the trees like smoke from a dying campfire. But I'd felt eyes on me, that crawling sensation between your shoulder blades that comes from being hunted. My radio crackled. "Mitchell, come in. Family wants to know if you found anything." I keyed the mic, still scanning the forest. "Tell them I've located evidence, working to recover it now." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Any local legends about this area I should know about?" Long pause. Then Chief Rodriguez's voice, tight with concern. "Why do you ask?" "Just getting a weird vibe out here, Chief. You know how the Peninsula tribes are about certain places. Wondering if there's local history." Another pause. When Rodriguez came back, his voice was lower. "Old-timers call that area the feeding ground. Tribe members won't go there after sunset. Bunch of superstitious bullshit, but watch yourself out there, Mitchell. Weather's getting worse." I looked up at the boot again. 20 feet up, impossible to reach without climbing gear. Dangling like bait. Like a lure. My military mind started connecting dots I didn't want connected. Sophia Williams had been hiking alone, despite park regulations recommending buddy system. She'd told the ranger station she was researching local folklore for her anthropology thesis at University of Washington. Her last known position was the Thunder Creek trailhead at 800 yesterday morning. And now her boot was displayed 20 feet up in a tree in a place the local tribes called the feeding ground. I clipped into my rope and started climbing. The bark of the Douglas fir was rough under my gloves, and the fog seemed to thicken as I ascended. By the time I reached the boot, I could barely see the ground below. The silence pressed against my eardrums like deep water. Up close, the boot told a story that made my stomach clench. The laces were tied in a perfect bow like Sophia had carefully removed it, but the leather showed deep gouges that looked almost like teeth marks. Large teeth. Predator teeth. I photographed the boot from multiple angles with my phone, then carefully worked it free from the branch. As I did, something small and white fell from inside. A bone fragment. Human, from the look of it. Maybe a finger bone. Jesus Christ, I whispered, catching it before it could fall to the forest floor. That's when I heard the sound that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life, if I lived through the next 24 hours. A whistle. Low and musical, like wind through a flute, but coming from the direction of the fog. Not human, not animal. Something else entirely. The sound seemed to move, circling my position in the canopy. My tactical training kicked in. Triangulate the threat, establish fields of fire, plan escape routes. But the fog had become so thick I couldn't see more than 10 feet in any direction. I rappelled down faster than safe procedure recommended, boots hitting the needle-soft ground with barely controlled impact. My hands were shaking as I coiled the rope, not from fear, but from adrenaline. Combat adrenaline. The whistling had stopped, but something was moving through the underbrush. Something big enough to disturb the ferns, but quiet enough that I couldn't pinpoint its location. I pulled out my phone to call for backup and saw I had no signal. Not unusual in the deep forest, but the timing felt wrong. I'd had 2 bars when I'd started climbing. My radio was dead static. The fog swirled, and for just a moment I glimpsed something that made my blood freeze. A shape moving between the trees. Humanoid but wrong somehow. Too tall, too fluid, moving with a predator's grace that no human possessed. It was watching me. I drew my Glock, safety off, finger alongside the trigger guard. "Olympic National Park Ranger," I shouted into the fog. "Identify yourself." The whistling started again, closer this time, and I realized with growing horror that it was coming from multiple directions. Whatever was out there, it wasn't alone. Or it was something that could be in multiple places at once. My phone buzzed. Somehow, impossibly, I had a text message from Sophia Williams's number. "Help me. They're not human. The old stories are true. Don't follow the whistle. Run." The message was time-stamped 18 minutes ago. Sophia Williams had been missing for 30 hours. I started moving, following a compass bearing toward the Thunder Creek Trail. Military doctrine. When ambushed in unknown terrain, break contact and move to higher ground. The official trail would have better visibility and potential for rescue, but the fog seemed to follow me, thick tendrils reaching between the trees like grasping fingers. Every few hundred yards I'd hear the whistling again, sometimes behind me, sometimes to the flanks, occasionally from ahead. Whatever was tracking me was hurting me, away from the trail, deeper into the forest. My water was already down to 3 liters. In this humidity, I'd need more by tonight. My phone battery showed 60%. The day was burning away, and I was no closer to finding Sophia Williams. But I was beginning to understand that Sophia Williams might not want to be found. Not by me. Another text arrived. Connor Mitchell, age 34, wife Sarah, daughter Emma, lives at 412 Maple Street, Port Townsend. My blood turned to ice water. I'd never told anyone out here my family details. My nameplate just said Mitchell. How could someone, or something, know where I lived? "We know about your family, Connor. We can smell their fear from here." I was being hunted by something that knew my name, my address, my family. Something that had Sophia's phone but wasn't Sophia. The whistling grew louder, more insistent, and I heard other sounds now. Branches snapping under heavy weight, the whisper of something large moving through the underbrush with predatory patience. I reached for my radio, hoping distance might improve reception. Any station, this is Ranger Mitchell requesting immediate backup at coordinates. I checked my GPS and felt my stomach drop. The coordinates were impossible. According to the GPS, I was 3 miles south of where I'd started, in an area of the park that was supposed to be impassable ravine country. But I was standing on solid ground, surrounded by old-growth forest. The device had to be malfunctioning. Had to be. My phone buzzed again. Your technology can't help you here, soldier boy. This place exists between your maps. We've been here since before your people had names for trees. The fog began to thin, and I saw something that made my rational mind want to shut down completely. I was standing at the edge of a clearing that wasn't on any park map. In the center was a circle of standing stones, each one carved with symbols that looked older than anything I'd seen in museums. Around the stones were scattered what looked like camping gear. Dozens of backpacks, tents, hiking boots arranged in neat piles. And bones, human bones, picked clean and arranged in careful patterns between the stones. This was the feeding ground. I counted at least 30 backpacks, representing 30 missing hikers who'd never made it home to their families. 30 people who'd encountered whatever was whistling in the fog and never walked out of these woods. At the far edge of the clearing, a figure stepped out of the tree line. It looked like Sophia Williams, same dark hair, same build, wearing the clothes she'd been reported missing in. But she moved wrong, too fluid, too graceful, like a predator mimicking prey behavior. And when she smiled, I saw the teeth. Row after row of them, like a shark's mouth, designed for tearing flesh from bone. "Hello, Connor," she said in Sophia's voice. "We've been waiting for you." More figures emerged from the fog. Men and women in hiking clothes, all moving with that same predatory grace, all smiling with too many teeth. I recognized some faces from missing person reports I'd filed over the years. They weren't missing anymore. They'd been converted. "You're going to love it here," Sophia Thing continued, taking a step closer. "No more worrying about your family, no more responsibilities, just the hunt and the feed and the endless night." I raised my Glock, centering the sights on her chest. "Stay back! I'm warning you!" She laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking in moonlight. "Iron and lead, Connor? How modern. We were old when your ancestors were painting themselves blue and worshipping trees." The other figures began to circle, moving with coordinated pack behavior. I counted 12, all wearing the faces of people who'd trusted the wrong stranger, followed the wrong trail, answered the wrong whistle in the woods. "The girl's essence made us stronger," Sophia Thing said, running her tongue across those terrible teeth. "College-educated, full of life and hope. Her memories are delicious, especially the ones about her family." My tactical training kicked in. Multiple hostiles, unknown capabilities, limited ammunition. Standard engagement rules didn't apply when the enemy wasn't human. I started shooting. The first round took Sophia Thing center mass 180-grain hollow point that should have dropped her instantly. Instead, she staggered backwards, black ichor spraying from the wound, then straightened up and kept advancing. The others rushed me. I put 3 rounds into the nearest one, a middle-aged man in REI gear whose face I remembered from a missing person report from 2016. The bullets punched through him like he was made of smoke, barely slowing his advance. Claws raked across my back, shredding my pack and uniform shirt. I spun and fired point blank into what had once been a teenage girl, watching her face dissolve and reform like liquid shadow. They weren't human anymore. They were something else wearing human shapes, and my bullets were about as effective as throwing pebbles at a freight train. I broke contact, running for the tree line as claws and teeth snapped at my heels. Behind me, that horrible whistling rose into a hunting howl that seemed to shake the very trees. I had 14 rounds left, 3 liters of water, and no way to call for backup. The fog was closing in again, and something that might have once been human was hunting me through a forest that didn't exist on any map. But I had one advantage they might not expect. I was a soldier before I was a ranger, and soldiers don't give up when the odds are impossible. They just get creative. I ran deeper into the non-existent forest, following a plan that was forming in my tactical mind. If these things were ancient, If they'd been here since before European colonization, then they might not understand modern warfare. Time to educate them. If this story's giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Connor's situation? Comment below. Part 2. The Hunter Becomes Hunted. The howling followed me through fog that seemed alive, reaching between the trees like ghostly fingers trying to drag me back to that circle of bones. My boots splashed through a creek that definitely wasn't on the park maps, and I could hear something large crashing through the underbrush behind me. Multiple somethings, moving with pack coordination. My phone buzzed. Running only makes the hunt more satisfying, Connor. Your fear makes you taste better. I ignored it, focusing on terrain assessment. The ground was rising, which meant I was heading toward higher elevation. If I could find rock outcroppings or defensive positions, I might be able to hold them off long enough to figure out how to kill something that bullets barely affected. The fog began to thin as I climbed, and I caught glimpses of a ridgeline ahead. My lungs burned from the ascent, but combat conditioning kept my legs moving. Behind me, the whistling had become a symphony of hunting calls, echoing off the trees like some nightmare opera. I reached the ridge and found what I was looking for. A natural rock formation that created a defensive position with clear fields of fire and limited approach routes. An outcropping of basalt provided cover, and a narrow ledge offered the only access route. Perfect killing ground. I dropped my pack and inventoried my remaining gear. 13 rounds in the Glock, 2 spare magazines with 15 rounds each. Not much against supernatural predators, but enough to make them respect the approach routes. More importantly, I had my climbing gear, 2 emergency flares, and a headlamp with spare batteries. Fire. That was the answer. Every culture in human history had legends about supernatural creatures that feared fire. Whatever these things were, they'd evolved in a world where humans used fire as their primary weapon against the dark. I pulled out one of my emergency flares and tested the ignition. Red phosphorus blazed to life, casting dancing shadows across the rock face. The effect was immediate. The whistling in the fog below stopped, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. My phone buzzed again. Clever soldier. But fire burns out, and we are patient. The fog swirled at the base of the outcropping, and I saw shapes moving within it. They were testing the approaches, probing for weaknesses in my position. Pack behavior, just like wolves. But I wasn't prey. I was a predator who'd been forced into defensive mode. Time to go on the offensive. I clipped the burning flare to my gear and started rigging an improvised explosive device using my remaining emergency flare and some climbing rope. Not enough to kill them. I didn't have proper materials for that. But enough to buy me time and maybe cause some real damage. The first one tried to rush the ledge approach while I was working. I put 2 rounds center mass, and while the bullets didn't drop it, the impact sent it tumbling off the narrow ledge into the fog below. 11 rounds left. You're going to have to do better than that, I shouted into the fog. I've faced worse than you in Afghanistan. That was a lie, but psychological warfare was as important as actual bullets. A voice drifted up from the fog, Sophia's voice, but wrong somehow, like a broken recording. Your wife is dreaming about you right now, Connor. She's worried because you didn't call to check in. Should we visit her while you're occupied? My blood turned cold. Sarah always worried when I didn't call by my scheduled check-in time, and Emma would be getting home from school soon, looking for Daddy to help with her homework. You go anywhere near my family, I growled, and I'll burn this entire fucking forest down around you. Laughter echoed from multiple directions. They were surrounding the outcropping, cutting off escape routes. My phone showed 4:47 p.m. Sunset was at 7:23. These things had mentioned being stronger at night, which meant I had less than 3 hours before this got even worse. I finished rigging my improvised device and waited. Military doctrine. Let the enemy commit to an attack, then counterattack when they're exposed. They came from 3 directions simultaneously. The first one hit my IED as it scrambled up the main approach route. The phosphorus flare detonated in a burst of chemical fire that sent inhuman screaming echoing off the rock face. When the smoke cleared, There was nothing left but black ichor and the smell of burning sulfur. One down. The second one tried to climb straight up the rock face, moving with spider-like agility that defied human anatomy. I put 4 rounds into it before it lost its grip and fell into the fog. Not dead, but discouraged. 7 rounds left. The third one was smarter. It waited until I was reloading, then rushed from an unexpected angle, directly through the fog itself, moving like smoke made solid. Claws raked across my ribs, shredding Kevlar and flesh with equal ease. I rolled away, came up with my backup magazine seated, and put the entire 15-round mag into the thing at point-blank range. This time, the damage stuck. Whatever it was dissolved into mist and bone fragments, leaving behind only Sophia Williams' hiking clothes and the smell of ancient decay. 2 down, 10 left. 7 rounds remaining. My side was bleeding, but not arterial. I applied pressure with my first aid kit and tried to think tactically. The fire had worked, but I was running out of flares. Soon I'd be fighting in darkness against creatures that had been hunting humans since before my ancestors learned to use tools. My radio crackled, the first time it had worked since I'd found the boot. "Mitchell, this is Base. Come in, over." I keyed the mic with bloody fingers. "Base, this is Mitchell. I need immediate backup at..." I checked my GPS and swore. The coordinates were changing even as I watched, numbers shifting like water. "Mitchell, you're breaking up. Say again your location." How do you explain that you're lost in a place that doesn't exist?" "I'm in contact with hostile unknowns. Request armed backup and medical support." "Mitchell, confirm. Did you say hostile contact?" "Affirmative. Multiple hostiles. Non-human. Repeat, non-human entities. They have taken Sophia Williams. She's been converted." Long pause. Then Chief Rodriguez's voice, tight with disbelief. "Mitchell, are you injured? You're not making sense." Before I could respond, my radio dissolved into static. In the fog below, I heard that horrible laughter again. "No one is coming, soldier boy. No one even knows where you are." My phone buzzed with a new message. This one from Sarah's number. "Daddy? Why aren't you home yet?" "Mommy is crying." The message was followed by a photo of my living room, taken from inside the house. My wife was sitting on the couch, holding Emma, both of them looking toward the window with expressions of worry and fear. They were in my house, watching my family. Rage flooded through me, burning away fear and tactical thinking. I didn't care about impossible creatures or supernatural abilities. Something was threatening my wife and daughter, and that made them dead things walking. I strapped my last flare to my gear, chambered my final round, and started down the rock face toward the fog. Time to end this. "You want to hunt?" I called into the mist. "Come and get me, you ancient fucks. Let's see how you do against someone who hunts back." The fog seemed to pulse with malevolent life, and shapes began to emerge from all directions. 12 figures that had once been human, now wearing faces like masks over something much older and hungrier. But they made one mistake. They'd threatened my family. I hit the fog line running, the flare blazing in my left hand like a torch, my Glock steady in my right. The nearest creature reached for me with claws like broken glass, and I put my last bullet through what had once been its face. Then I was among them with fire and fury, fighting not just for my life, but for my family's safety, in a battle that would determine whether the Williams family ever got their daughter back, and whether the Mitchell family ever saw their husband and father again. The real hunt was just beginning. Part 3. Blood and Fire. The fog exploded into chaos as I reached the feeding ground with my flare held high like a medieval torch. The creatures scattered from the chemical fire, their forms flickering between human appearance and something far more primitive, all teeth and claws and predatory hunger that had outlasted ice ages. But they didn't run far. "Surrounded," I breathed, tactical assessment kicking in despite the impossibility of my situation. 12 hostiles in a rough circle, each keeping just outside the range of my flare's light. Classic pack behavior. My phone buzzed. "Last bullet spent, Connor. How do you plan to fight the ancient dark with empty hands? I smiled grimly and pulled the pin from my last flare with my teeth, holding both ignited devices like twin swords. Same way my ancestors did, you ancient bastards, with fire and steel and the will to protect what matters. The nearest one, wearing the face of a teenage boy who'd gone missing in 2017, hissed and stepped back from the phosphorus glare. Fire burns out, Ranger. We have forever. Yeah? I lunged forward, driving both flares toward its chest, but forever's a long time to spend burning. The creature shrieked as the chemical fire ate through its stolen flesh, dissolving the human disguise to reveal something that looked like it had crawled out of mankind's earliest nightmares. Ancient sinew and bone wrapped in shadow, held together by malevolent will rather than biology. The others rushed me while I was committed to the attack. Claws raked across my back again, deeper this time, and I felt warm blood soaking through my uniform. I spun, swinging the flares in wide arcs, forcing them back into the fog. But the chemical fire was already burning lower. Maybe 90 seconds before I was fighting barehanded against creatures that had been hunting humans since before recorded history. My radio crackled again, impossibly. Connor, can you hear me? Sarah's voice, but not coming from the radio. I turned toward the sound and saw her standing at the edge of the stone circle, wearing the same yellow dress she'd had on this morning when she'd kissed me goodbye. Emma was beside her, clutching her stuffed rabbit, both of them looking lost and terrified. "Daddy," Emma called. "We got scared when you didn't come home." Ice water flooded my veins. They were here. Somehow, impossibly, my family had followed me into this nightmare place that didn't exist on any map. "No," I whispered, "they can't be here. This isn't real." But Emma was crying now, the way she did when she'd had a bad dream, and Sarah was reaching toward me with desperate eyes. "Connor, please, take us home." The creatures had stopped advancing, watching my reaction with predatory patience. They were waiting to see what I'd do. "Clever," I growled, never taking my eyes off my family. But not clever enough. I raised one of the flares towards Sarah and Emma. "My wife is 5'6". The woman you're showing me is at least 5'8". And Emma's rabbit is named Mr. Whiskers. That one's named Mr. Buttons." The illusion flickered, and for just a moment I saw the truth. 2 more creatures wearing stolen shapes, trying to break my will by threatening what I loved most. "Nice try," I said, and drove both flares into their chests. The screaming that followed wasn't human. It was the sound of something ancient and evil having its disguise burned away by chemical fire. The fake Sarah dissolved into smoke and shadow, leaving behind only the smell of sulfur and old graves. But my flares were dying. The remaining creatures closed in, moving with renewed confidence. In 30 seconds, I'd be fighting blind against enemies that could see perfectly in darkness. Time for desperate measures. I pulled out my phone and activated the flashlight, adding its LED beam to the dying glow of the flares. Not as effective as fire, but better than nothing. Then I started moving toward the center of the stone circle, where the scattered camping gear offered potential weapons. A titanium hiking pole, better than nothing. I grabbed it and spun, just as the first creature reached me, driving the pointed end through what had once been a middle-aged woman's chest. The aluminum punched through stolen flesh like it was made of paper. An ichor sprayed across the ancient stones. The creature looked down at the pole protruding from its chest, then back at me. "Is that supposed to hurt?" It grabbed the hiking pole and snapped it in half. Fuck. I dove for the next pile of gear as claws whistled through the air where my head had been. A climbing axe. Now we were talking. Ice tool in one hand, dying flare in the other. I faced the remaining pack with the grim determination of a soldier who'd run out of options. "Come on then," I snarled. "Let's finish this." They came from all directions at once. I got the climbing axe through one skull before the others dragged me down. Claws shredded my uniform and the flesh beneath it. Teeth snapped inches from my throat. Ancient hunger pressed down on me like a living weight. But as the flare died completely, plunging us into darkness, I felt something I hadn't expected. Heat. Not from the expired flare, but from something deeper, something that had been building since I'd first seen Sophia's boot in that impossible tree. The creatures froze, their attacks faltering. In the darkness, I could feel their confusion. "What?" one of them whispered. The heat was coming from my chest, right over my heart. From the small silver pendant Sarah had given me on our wedding day, a cross that had belonged to her grandmother, worn smooth by 3 generations of prayers. "Impossible," another creature hissed. "The old symbols have no power here. This ground is older than your Christ." But the pendant was getting hotter, burning against my skin through the torn fabric of my uniform. And in that heat, I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood. Faith. Not the complicated theology of churches and doctrine, but the simple, absolute belief that good could triumph over evil, that love was stronger than hunger, that a man fighting for his family had powers that ancient monsters couldn't understand. Light blazed from the pendant, not the chemical red of flares, but pure white radiance that cut through the darkness like a sword. The creatures shrieked and threw themselves backwards, their stolen forms beginning to dissolve in the holy light. "This isn't possible," Sophia Thing screamed, her beautiful mask melting away to reveal the predator beneath. "We are older than your god. We fed on your ancestors when they still worshipped trees." "Yeah?" I stood up, the pendant blazing like a star against my chest. "Well, here's the thing about faith, you ancient bitch." I grabbed the climbing axe and started walking toward her, each step leaving burning footprints in the ancient soil. "It's not about age. It's about love. And I love my family more than you hunger for blood." The axe took her head clean off. The other creatures fled into the fog, their hunting howls fading into the distance. But I knew they'd be back. Predators like these didn't give up easily. I had to find the real Sophia Williams and get us both out of this nightmare place before they regrouped. My phone showed signal again. Impossible. But I'd stopped questioning impossibilities. I dialed 911. "This is Olympic National Park Ranger Connor Mitchell, badge number 4479. I need immediate backup and medical support. I've located missing person Sophia Williams, and we're both in immediate danger." "Copy that, Ranger Mitchell. What's your location?" I looked around at the stone circle that didn't exist on any map, in a forest that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. "Unknown," I said, "but track my phone signal and tell my wife and daughter I'm coming home." As the pendant's light began to fade, I heard something that filled me with hope. A weak voice calling from somewhere beyond the stone circle. "Help. Please. Somebody help me." Sophia Williams. The real one. Still alive. Part 4. Salvation. I followed Sophia's voice deeper into the impossible forest, the pendant's fading light my only guide through fog that seemed to writhe with malevolent life. Each step took me further from anything resembling the Olympic National Park I knew, into terrain that felt older than the mountains themselves. "Sophia," I called. "Keep talking. I'm coming for you." "Here." Her voice was weak, terrified, but definitely human. "I'm trapped. They put me in some kind of cave." I found her 30 yards beyond the stone circle, in a natural depression that had been turned into a makeshift prison. Fallen logs formed a crude cage, but what kept her trapped wasn't the physical barriers. It was the circle of symbols carved into the earth around her, glowing with sick phosphorescence. She was alive, but barely recognizable. Her hiking clothes were torn and blood-stained, her dark hair matted with mud and worse things, but her eyes were human, filled with terror and desperate hope. "Connor Mitchell, Olympic National Park Service," I said, approaching the barrier carefully. "We're going to get you out of here." "The symbols," she whispered. "I can't cross them. Every time I try, it feels like my skin is burning." I knelt beside the glowing marks and felt my pendant grow warm again. These weren't random scratches. They were binding runes older than Christianity, designed to hold human prey while the creatures decided how to process them. "How long have you been here?" "I don't know, days? Weeks? Time doesn't work right in this place." Tears streaked down her dirt-stained cheeks. "Those things, they wear people's faces. They showed me my dead grandmother, my high school boyfriend. They made me watch while they... It's okay, I said firmly. You're safe now. But I need you to stay calm while I figure out how to break these markings. The pendant was burning against my chest again, responding to the ancient evil carved into the earth. I pulled it out and held it toward the nearest symbol. The phosphorescent glow flickered and died. Faith, I muttered, understanding flooding through me. It's about faith. I pressed the cross directly against the first symbol, praying harder than I had since Emma was born premature and spent 2 weeks in the NICU. The carved line sizzled and cracked, ancient power meeting something even older. Love, protection, the absolute refusal to let evil win. One by one, the binding runes died under the pendant's touch. As the last one faded, Sophia stumbled forward into my arms, sobbing with relief. My phone, she gasped. They took my phone. They were sending messages pretending to be me. I know, I said, helping her stand. Can you walk? I think so. But Connor, there are more of them. So many more. This isn't the only feeding ground. My blood went cold. How many? I saw at least 30. Maybe more. They've been taking people for decades, maybe centuries. The missing hikers, the vanished campers. They're all here somewhere, converted into those things. 30+ supernatural predators. And I had an injured civilian to protect with no ammunition and failing equipment. We need to move, I said. Can you make it to high ground? Before she could answer, the howling started again. Closer this time, and coming from multiple directions. They'd regrouped and were hunting us. I helped Sophia toward the ridge where I'd made my stand, but her injured leg slowed our progress. Behind us, I could hear branches snapping as something large moved through the underbrush with predatory patience. There! Sophia pointed toward a gap in the fog. I can see lights. I looked where she was pointing and felt my heart skip. Red and blue strobes were flashing through the trees. Emergency vehicles. Real ones, in the real world that existed on maps and followed normal physics. How? I breathed. Your faith, Sophia said, understanding in her voice. It's creating a bridge between this place and the real world. We ran toward the lights, crashing through undergrowth that should have been impassable. Behind us, the hunting howls grew closer, more desperate. The creatures knew we were escaping their feeding ground. The fog began to thin, and I saw familiar terrain, the real Thunder Creek Trail, with search and rescue vehicles parked at the trailhead. Chief Rodriguez was coordinating the search teams, barking orders into his radio. "Chief," I shouted, half carrying Sophia toward the lights. "We're here." He turned, and the relief on his face was immediate. "Mitchell, Jesus Christ, where have you been? We've been searching for 8 hours." 8 hours. In the feeding ground, it had felt like days. "Medical," I called. "Sophia Williams is injured but stable. We need immediate transport." As the paramedics took over Sophia's care, I pulled Chief Rodriguez aside. "Those creatures are still out there. The feeding ground is real, and there are more victims." He studied my torn uniform, the blood on my face, the wild intensity in my eyes. "Connor, you've been through trauma. Let's get you checked out, then we'll debrief." "Chief." I grabbed his arm. "Look at her injuries. Look at mine. Does this look like we fell down a hill?" The claw marks on my back were 4 parallel gouges too wide to be from any bear or cougar. Sophia's wounds showed the same pattern, predator damage from something with hands like claws. "What are you saying?" Before I could answer, my radio crackled. "All units, we have multiple missing person reports. Hikers on the Bone Trail. Last known position coordinates 47821 degrees N, 1236044 degrees W. The same coordinates where I'd found Sophia's boot. Rodriguez looked at me with growing understanding. "How many?" "A family of 4, dispatch continued. 2 adults, 2 children, ages 8 and 12. My blood froze. Children. The creatures were still hunting. "Chief," I said quietly, "I need backup, armed backup, and I need someone to call my wife and tell her I'm okay." "Where are you going?" I looked back toward the fog that was already rolling in from the deeper forest, carrying with it the sound of distant howling, to finish what those ancient bastards started. Epilogue: The Real Hunt. Begins. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror and comment your theory about what really happened to Sophia Williams. I read every single one. 3 months later, the official report listed Sophia Williams as found after being lost in Olympic National Park for 36 hours due to poor weather conditions. Her injuries were attributed to a fall from a cliff face. Ranger Connor Mitchell received a commendation for outstanding service in locating and rescuing a missing person under difficult conditions. The report made no mention of the feeding ground. It made no mention of the 17 other missing person cases that were quietly reopened and reclassified, and it made no mention of the specialized tactical team that now patrols the deep wilderness of Olympic National Park, armed with weapons blessed by 7 different faiths and led by a ranger who carries his grandmother-in-law's silver cross like a sword against the dark. Some hunts never end. They just change who's doing the hunting. The bone trail remains officially closed to the public, for now. My name is Marcus Rivera, and finding Hannah Grace Miller's Cartera wallet sitting perfectly centered on her camp table, next to a cup of coffee that was still warm enough to steam in the October mountain air, was when I knew this wasn't going to be another routine missing person case, not even close. I'd been a ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 23 years, and in 6 months I'd be collecting my pension and forgetting I ever owned a pair of hiking boots. Hell, I'd been mentally checked out for the last 2 years anyway. Ever since my divorce finalized and the job stopped feeling like a calling, and started feeling like just another way to count down the days until I could disappear into obscurity. But standing there at grid coordinates 35.6532 degree N, 83, 5070 W, staring at Hannah's campsite that looked like she'd stepped away for 30 seconds instead of being missing for 18 hours. Something cold crawled up my spine that had nothing to do with the morning mountain air. The call had come in at 0647 hours. Hannah's mother crying so hard I could barely understand her through the static. She was supposed to call last night. She always calls. Please, you have to find my baby girl. 23-year-old graduate student from University of Tennessee, working on her folklore thesis about Appalachian fire cults. Last contact with family at 1900 hours the previous evening via text. Found something amazing about the old legends. Call you tomorrow. She never called tomorrow. I'd driven my Park Service F-150 up the fire road to the Cades Cove backcountry, following her permit coordinates, expecting to find the usual shit show. Scattered gear, signs of panic, maybe animal interference. What I found instead made my 23 years of experience feel like absolutely nothing. Hannah's REI quarter dome tent was perfectly erected, guy lines taut, rainfly properly secured. Her MSR Whisperlight stove still had a half-full fuel canister attached. A bowl of what looked like instant oatmeal sat on her camp table, spoon resting against the rim, like she'd been interrupted mid-bite. Her Nalgene water bottle was 3/4 full. Her headlamp hung from the tent's gear loop, battery still good when I tested it, but Hannah Grace Miller was gone. I keyed my Motorola radio. Base, this is Unit 23, I'm at the Miller campsite. Something's off here. Static crackled back. Unit 23, say again. You're breaking up. I looked at my radio display. Full signal strength, fresh batteries I'd installed that morning. I tried again. Base Unit 23, the missing person's campsite is intact, but the radio died. Completely. No static, no carrier tone, nothing. Like someone had flipped a switch somewhere. I pulled out my iPhone. No signal bars, but that wasn't unusual up here. What was unusual was that the screen showed my battery at 67%, but as I watched, it dropped to 54%, then 31%, then the phone shut itself off. The device had been at 89% when I'd parked 20 minutes ago. The coffee was still warm. I touched the ceramic mug with the back of my hand. Definitely warm, maybe 90 degrees. But if Hannah had been missing since last night, that coffee should have been stone cold for hours. I looked closer at the liquid. Black coffee, no cream, steam still rising in lazy wisps that seemed to hang in the air longer than physics should allow. That's when I noticed my breath. Despite the morning sun and the October temperature that should have been around 55 degrees, I could see my exhalation forming white puffs. My hands were starting to ache with cold. I checked the thermometer on my pack, 42 degrees and dropping. "What the hell?" I muttered, the words visible in the suddenly frigid air. I started photographing the scene with my backup digital camera, trying to follow proper protocol even as every instinct screamed that protocols weren't going to help with whatever this was. Through the viewfinder, I noticed something that made my hands shake for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. The shadows were wrong. The sun was hitting Hannah's campsite from the east, morning light filtering through the oak and maple canopy, but her tent was casting a shadow that pointed northeast. Impossible unless the sun had suddenly jumped 60 degrees across the sky. I lowered the camera and looked directly at the shadows with my naked eyes. They pointed in the right direction. I raised the camera again. Through the lens, the shadows bent toward the northeast, defying the visible sun. My backup GPS unit started beeping an error code I'd never heard before. The display showed our coordinates as 0.000 DGN, 0.0000 W, the middle of the fucking ocean. I turned it off and on again. Same impossible reading. The forest had gone completely silent. In 23 years, I'd never heard the Smokies this quiet. No birds, no insects, no squirrels chattering in the trees. Even the wind had stopped. The silence pressed against my eardrums like I was underwater. I could hear my own heartbeat, my breathing, the creak of my leather gun belt. That's when I found Hannah's research materials. Her journal lay open beside the laptop filled with neat handwriting in black ink. The last entry was dated yesterday, time-stamped 6:47 p.m. Local historian in Gatlinburg confirmed the old stories. The Seta da Chama Eterna wasn't just folklore, they were real. Portuguese-speaking cult that settled here in 1892, practiced fire worship and human sacrifice, built hidden temples somewhere in these mountains, disappeared suddenly in 1934, but locals whispered they didn't really leave. They went underground. Below that, in different handwriting, loose flowing script that definitely wasn't Hannah's. Eles estão chamando você de volta. I don't speak Portuguese, but something about those words made my skin crawl. Her laptop was still open, screen active, showing a browser with 17 tabs open about fire cults, ritual sacrifice, and something called flame summoning. The battery indicator showed 78%, but as I watched, it dropped to 53%, then 29%. The screen flickered, showing impossible images for split seconds. Figures in robes standing around a massive bonfire, faces that seemed to shift and burn even as they smiled. I slammed the laptop shut. My hands were shaking now, and not from cold. I'd been doing this job long enough to know when something was beyond normal search and rescue, but I'd also been doing it long enough to know I couldn't just walk away from a missing person, especially not a 23-year-old girl whose mother's desperate voice was still echoing in my head. I started a systematic search pattern around the campsite, looking for any sign of where Hannah might have gone. No footprints leading away from the site, no disturbed vegetation, no signs of struggle or animal activity. It was like she had simply evaporated. But 20 feet from her tent, I found the burn marks, perfect circles of scorched earth, each about 3 feet in diameter, arranged in a pattern that hurt to look at directly. The grass inside each circle was burned down to ash, but the soil underneath looked wrong. Instead of the normal brown mountain dirt, it was blackened and crystallized, like it had been subjected to temperatures hot enough to turn sand into glass. The burn marks were still warm. I knelt down and held my hand 6 inches above one of the circles. Heat radiated up like a banked fire, impossible heat that should have dissipated hours ago if these marks had been made last night. I had a sudden irrational urge to touch the blackened soil, to press my palm against the crystallized earth. A voice behind me said, "She came willingly at first." I spun around, hand instinctively going to my service weapon, heart slamming against my ribs. A woman stood at the edge of Hannah's campsite, maybe 60 years old. wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans that looked like they'd been worn hard for decades. Graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, weathered face with lines that spoke of a lifetime outdoors. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back from the crime scene," I said, trying to sound authoritative while my mind raced. Where the hell had she come from? I'd been alone here 30 seconds ago. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Não é uma cena de crime, Ranger Rivera. É local de oração." Portuguese. The same language from Hannah's journal. "I don't understand what you're saying, ma'am. I'm going to need to see some identification." "You understand more than you think." Her accent was thick, but her English was clear. The girl, Hannah, she came looking for stories about the old ways. We told her stories. Good stories. True stories. I keyed my radio again, hoping against hope it would work. Dead silence. "Ma'am, I'm investigating a missing person case. If you have information about Hannah Miller, I need you to come with me to—" "Hannah Miller is exactly where she chose to be," the woman interrupted. "Where the flame called her. Where all the devoted ones go when they hear the true voice of fire." The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. My breath came out in thick white clouds now, and I could feel ice crystals forming in my mustache. Around us, the burn marks in the ground began to glow with a dull red light, like embers stirring to life. "She left more than her camp behind," the woman continued, gesturing toward Hannah's tent. "She left her old life, her old fears, her old limitations. The Seta de Chama Eterna teaches that fire is the only truth, Ranger Rivera. Everything else is just fuel waiting to burn. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Marcus Rivera's situation? Comment below." The glow from the burn marks was getting brighter. I could feel heat through the soles of my boots now, and the smell of sulfur began mixing with the pine-scented mountain air. My GPS unit beeped again, still showing coordinates in the middle of the ocean, but now the elevation reading showed negative 2,847 feet, like we were underground, or somewhere that wasn't supposed to exist. "Where is she?" I demanded, drawing my service weapon. "Where is Hannah Miller?" The woman's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed to flicker between white enamel and blackened char. "She is with the flame, preparing for tonight's ceremony. The moon is right, the season is right, the sacrifice is willing. Everything the Seta has waited for since we went into the deep places in 1934. Lady, I don't know what kind of cult bullshit you're peddling, but you're under arrest for—" My gun jammed. The trigger wouldn't pull, like the mechanism had frozen solid. I looked down at the weapon. Ice crystals were forming along the barrel and trigger guard, despite the heat radiating from the ground beneath us. The woman laughed, a sound like crackling logs. "Your tools of the modern world have no power here, Ranger Rivera. This is consecrated ground now. Holy ground. The fire has marked this place." The burn marks flared brighter, and suddenly I could see them extending in a pattern much larger than I'd initially realized. Dozens of circles stretching out through the forest in geometric designs that seemed to shift and writhe when I tried to follow them with my eyes. Some of the circles were old, filled with tree growth that had learned to grow around the blackened soil. Others looked fresh, still smoking. This had been going on for decades. "How many?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How many what, Ranger? How many people have you taken?" Her expression grew almost sad. "Taken is the wrong word. We offer invitation. Some accept the call of the flame. Others—" She shrugged. "Others provide fuel for those who do." I tried my radio one more time, got nothing but static that sounded almost like voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. My backup battery pack showed 0 charge despite being fresh that morning. Everything electronic was dying, but the woman stood there completely unaffected, like she existed in a different reality than the one that followed normal rules. "Hannah Grace Miller," I said, holstering my useless weapon. "Where is she right now?" "In the temple, preparing her heart, learning to let go of the things that bound her to the cold world above. By sunset, she will be ready for the final welcoming." Final welcoming? The embrace of pure flame. The transformation from flesh that fears fire to spirit that becomes fire. The woman's eyes reflected the glow from the burn marks. Pupils dilated so wide her irises had almost disappeared. The greatest gift we can offer. The greatest honor she can receive. Human sacrifice. They were going to burn Hannah alive. I thought about her mother's voice on the phone, the desperate love in those broken words. I thought about my own daughter, who I barely spoke to anymore since the divorce, who probably wouldn't even notice if I never came home from this shift. I thought about all the cases over the years where I'd found the bodies too late, where families had to bury empty caskets or never got closure at all. Something ignited in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Not the resigned professionalism of a burned-out ranger counting days until retirement. Something hotter, something that gave a damn. "Tell me where your temple is," I said. "It is not far. But it is not in your world anymore, Ranger Rivera." The Seta learned long ago how to step between the spaces, how to make doors where none existed before. Our temple exists in the place where fire dreams of burning. As she spoke, the air around us began to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. The familiar forest of the Great Smoky Mountains seemed to waver and bend, like I was looking at it through water. Trees that had been solid oak and maple started to look charred and skeletal. The October sky turned the color of smoke. I was losing my grip on reality, or reality was losing its grip on me. "The girl's family," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "They're expecting her to come home. Families of the flesh are temporary, Ranger Rivera. The family of flame is eternal." The woman gestured, and the burn marks flared so bright I had to shield my eyes. When the light faded, she was holding something in her hands, Hannah's phone. She left this willingly, left all her connections to the cold world. But we saved her last message, the one she tried to send but couldn't finish. She tossed me the phone. The screen was cracked. The case melted along the edges, but it powered on when I pressed the home button. A text message was displayed, half-typed. "Mom, I found them. The fire cult is real and they're still here, and they're showing me things that change everything. The flame isn't destruction, it's transformation, and I think I understand now why people chose to..." The message cut off there. "She chose," the woman said softly. "As they all choose, when they see the truth of fire. Your search is over, Ranger Rivera. The girl is found. She is safe. She is home." Bullshit. The word came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was past caring about diplomacy. She's a 23-year-old kid who got mixed up with a cult. I'm taking her home to her family. The woman's expression hardened. "You do not understand the forces you meddle with." "Maybe not. But I understand family. I understand promises made to desperate mothers. And I understand that Hannah Grace Miller is going home tonight, whether your fire god likes it or not." The burn marks erupted into pillars of flame. I scrambled backward as geysers of fire shot 15 feet into the air, heat so intense it singed the hair on my arms and turned the air into a furnace. The woman stood calmly in the center of the inferno, flames licking around her but never quite touching her skin. The fire knows its own, Ranger Rivera, and it knows its enemies. The flames began to take shape, forming into humanoid figures that stepped out of the burn marks like soldiers emerging from foxholes. Their faces were vague impressions of features carved from living fire, eyes that burned blue-white in the center and red-orange at the edges. They moved with purpose, surrounding me in a loose circle. My radio crackled to life. "Unit 23, this is base. We're showing emergency activation on your beacon. What's your status?" I grabbed the radio, amazed it was working. "Base, I need immediate backup at grid 35.6532 by 83.507. Multiple suspects, possible cult activity, missing person located. Send everything you've got." "Unit 23, we're not reading any emergency signal from your position. Are you sure about those coordinates?" I looked down at my radio. The display showed it was powered off, but I could still hear dispatch through the speaker, still talk into the microphone. "Base, I'm at the Miller campsite. I've made contact with individuals who claim to have the missing person, requesting immediate assistance." "Marcus?" The voice coming through the radio wasn't dispatch anymore. It was my ex-wife, Sarah. Marcus, where are you? Emily's been asking about you. She wants to know why Daddy doesn't come to her soccer games anymore. I stared at the radio in my hand. Sarah's voice continued. She made you a drawing, Marcus, a picture of our family all together. She wants to give it to you, but you never call anymore. You never visit. It's like you disappeared from our lives completely. The fire figures stepped closer. I could feel the heat from their bodies, smell the acrid scent of burning hair and charred meat. One of them spoke in a voice like crackling logs. The ranger who saves everyone except his own family. How fitting. Another one, this one sounding like wind through a wildfire. 23 years of rescues, but you couldn't rescue your marriage. Couldn't rescue your relationship with your daughter. Sarah's voice kept coming from the radio. She's growing up without you, Marcus. She doesn't even talk about you anymore. Sometimes I wonder if she remembers what you look like. I wanted to throw the radio into the flames, but I couldn't make my hands move. The voices were hitting marks I'd spent 2 years trying not to think about. Truths I'd buried under bourbon and overtime shifts in the countdown to retirement. You want to save Hannah Grace Miller? The original woman had moved closer, somehow passing through the ring of fire figures without disturbing them. Then trade places with her. One soul for another. The flame requires sacrifice, Ranger Rivera. It always has, Marcus. Emily's voice came through the radio now, thin and small like she was calling from very far away. Daddy, where are you? Mommy says you're busy with work, but I think you just don't want to see me anymore. Did I do something wrong? My knees nearly buckled. Emily was 8 years old and I hadn't spoken to her in 6 weeks, not since the last awkward, supervised visit, where she'd asked me why I looked so sad all the time and I'd just stared at her, unable to come up with an answer that didn't involve explaining how completely I'd failed at everything that mattered. Choose, the woman said, your life for hers, your failure for her future. Walk into the flame willingly and Hannah Miller goes free. The fire figures parted, creating a clear path to the largest of the burn marks, where flames now rose 20 feet high and heat rippled the air like a mirage. I could see shapes moving within the fire, human silhouettes dancing or writhing, hard to tell which. Marcus? Emily's voice again. I drew you a picture of us camping together like you promised. I put it on the refrigerator, but Mommy cried when she saw it. I don't understand why everyone's always sad now. I closed my eyes and tried to think. Tried to push past the emotional manipulation and focus on facts. Hannah was being held by a cult that had somehow figured out how to mess with electronics, with reality itself. They had abilities I didn't understand, in a place that didn't follow normal rules. Going in after her was probably suicide, but leaving her to burn alive wasn't an option either. I opened my eyes and looked directly at the woman. Show me proof she's alive. Show me Hannah, let me talk to her, and then we'll discuss terms. The woman smiled. You wish to see her? Very well. She gestured, and the flames in the largest burn mark shifted, swirling into a vertical disk of fire that cleared in the center like looking through a window. On the other side, I could see a stone chamber lit by dozens of candles. Hannah Grace Miller sat in the center of the room, cross-legged on what looked like an altar made of black volcanic glass. She looked peaceful, happy even. Her eyes were closed and she was smiling, swaying slightly like she was listening to music only she could hear. She wore a white robe that seemed to glow with its own light. Hannah, I shouted. Hannah Miller. Her eyes opened, and she looked directly at me through the fire portal. When she spoke, her voice came from all directions at once, like it was being carried by the wind. Ranger Rivera? Oh, good. You found me. But I'm not lost anymore. I'm home. Hannah, your mother is worried sick. Your family needs you to come back. She tilted her head, considering this. Family? Yes, I remember family. But that was before I understood the truth about fire, about transformation, about becoming more than just flesh that fears death. Hannah, you're 23 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't let these people showed me that I was never really alive before. She stood up and I could see that the white robe was covered in symbols that seemed to shift and burn when I tried to focus on them. I was just existing, Ranger Rivera. going through motions, following paths that other people laid out for me. But the flame shows you who you really are underneath all the fear. And who are you, Hannah? She smiled, and for a moment she looked like the normal college student from her driver's license photo. Then she opened her mouth to speak and flames flickered between her teeth. I am kindling that chooses to burn. The portal began to close, but before it disappeared completely, I heard Hannah's voice one more time. Tell my mother I love her. Tell her I finally found something worth becoming. The flames collapsed back into the burn mark, leaving me staring at scorched earth and the impossible knowledge that I'd just watched a young woman choose her own destruction and call it enlightenment. She has 6 hours, the woman said quietly. When the moon reaches its apex tonight, she will complete her transformation. After that, there will be nothing left of Hannah Miller to save. 6 hours. Sunset was at 7:23 p.m. according to my watch. It was now 11:47 a.m. I tried to think like a ranger instead of a man whose world had just tilted sideways. I had training for search and rescue, for emergency medical situations, for dealing with criminal suspects. But none of that training covered supernatural fire cults that could bend reality and turn missing persons into willing sacrifices. I needed help. Real help. But my radio was dead. My phone was dead, and I was apparently in some kind of pocket dimension where normal rules didn't apply. Unless... I looked around the campsite again, focusing on Hannah's research materials. Her laptop was still here, along with printed pages about the Seta da Chama Eterna. If she'd been investigating the cult, maybe she'd found something useful, some kind of weakness or a way to break whatever hold they had on people. You may read her research if you wish, the woman said, like she could follow my thoughts. She was very thorough, very dedicated. It made her easier to call when the time came. I ignored her and started going through Hannah's papers, articles printed from historical databases, photocopies of old newspaper clippings, handwritten notes in the margins. Most of it confirmed what I'd already heard. Portuguese-speaking fire cult, arrived in 1892, practiced human sacrifice, disappeared in 1934. But there was more. A note in Hannah's handwriting. Local Cherokee elder says the cult didn't disappear. They were driven underground by a coalition of families who lost children to the fire sickness. 7 families, led by someone called the Firewalker, performed a binding ritual in 1934 that trapped the cult in the space between spaces. But the binding was temporary, meant to last 84 years. 1934, plus 84, 2018. This year. Another note. The binding can be renewed, but only by someone who carries the bloodline of the Firewalker, and only during the night of the hungry moon, which appears to be a lunar eclipse. Next eclipse visible from Tennessee, October 27, 2018. Tonight. The lunar eclipse was tonight. I kept reading, heart pounding as the pieces fell together. Hannah hadn't just stumbled onto this cult by accident. She'd been researching them for months, following genealogical records, trying to trace the families who had originally bound them. And according to her notes, she'd found something. Rivera family records show José Miguel Rivera immigrated from Portuguese territory in 1889, settled in Appalachian Mountains, had conflict with fire worshippers who took his youngest son in 1933. José led the binding ritual in 1934. He was the Firewalker. Rivera bloodline still exists in the area. Current descendant, Marcus Rivera, National Park Service Ranger. My name, my family. I stared at the page, trying to process what I was reading. My great-great-grandfather had been the one who bound this cult in the first place. And according to Hannah's research, only someone from his bloodline could renew the binding. You understand now, the woman said. She was reading over my shoulder, somehow having moved close enough to touch without me noticing. Why the girl was so easy to call, why you were drawn here today. The flame remembers its enemies, Ranger Rivera. It has been waiting 84 years for the chance to face the Firewalker's bloodline again. So this was all a setup. Hannah, the disappearance, everything. Hannah Miller chose her path freely, but you were always going to come here today. The binding recognizes its own blood. It has been pulling you toward this moment your entire life. I thought about my career in the Park Service, my inexplicable love for these mountains, the way I'd always felt most at home in the deep woods where cell service died and civilization felt like a distant memory. Had any of it been my choice? Or had I been unconsciously following some kind of supernatural compulsion? The binding ritual, I said. How does it work? She laughed. You think I would tell you how to trap us again? You're telling me because you want me to try, because you think I'll fail? Her smile widened. The Firewalker was a powerful man, Ranger Rivera. Strong in will, strong in purpose, connected to the old ways through blood and spirit. You are, she gestured dismissively, a failed husband, a distant father, a man who counts days until he can escape responsibility forever. What strength do you have to stand against the eternal flame? She was right, and we both knew it. My great-great-grandfather had apparently been some kind of spiritual warrior. I was a middle-aged ranger with a drinking problem and a shattered family life. But Hannah Grace Miller was going to die tonight if I didn't at least try. I kept reading through her research, looking for any details about the binding ritual. Most of the information was fragmentary, bits and pieces gleaned from oral histories and half-remembered stories. But there were some consistent elements. The ritual required 4 components: blood of the Firewalker, water from the sacred spring, flames from the original binding site, and the willing sacrifice of something precious. Blood I had. Water I might be able to find if there were any springs in the area. Flames from the original binding site. If this campsite was built on consecrated ground, maybe the fire marks themselves would work. But the willing sacrifice of something precious? What did I have that was precious enough to power a ritual capable of binding supernatural entities? Emily's drawing. The one Sarah had mentioned through the radio, the picture of our family all together. Emily had drawn it, hoping her daddy would come back into her life, and I'd never even seen it. I pulled out my phone, not caring that it had been dead all morning. To my surprise, it powered on immediately. Full battery, full signal, like whatever was interfering with my electronics had decided to give me a break. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Sarah's number. My finger hovered over the call button for 30 seconds before I finally pressed it. Marcus? Sarah's voice was cautious. Is everything okay? You never call during work. I need to ask you about Emily's drawing, the one you mentioned. A pause. What? Marcus, I didn't mention any drawing. We haven't talked in 3 weeks. My blood went cold. If Sarah hadn't been talking through my radio, then what had I been hearing? Sarah, listen to me carefully. I need you to describe Emily's drawing, the one she made for me. Marcus, you're scaring me. Are you all right? Please, just describe the drawing. Another pause. It's a picture of the 3 of us camping. You're teaching her how to build a fire while I set up the tent. She used every crayon in the box, even drew little hearts floating around us. Sarah's voice softened. She titled it, My Family When We're Happy. Something broke open in my chest. Emily remembered when we were happy. She wanted us to be happy again. And I'd been so buried in my own failure and self-pity that I'd convinced myself she was better off without me. Sarah, I want to see her. I want to see you both. When I get home tonight, can we try to figure this out? Marcus, what's going on? You sound different. I might be different. I hope I am. I looked around at the impossible scene surrounding me. Burn marks glowing with supernatural fire. A woman who spoke for a flame cult. Trees that cast shadows in the wrong directions. I have to go. But I wanted you to know that I love you both. I love you, and I never stopped loving you. And I'm sorry I forgot how to show it. Marcus. I hung up and looked at the woman who had been listening to every word. Touching, she said. But words will not renew the binding, Ranger Rivera. Your ancestor understood that power requires sacrifice. Maybe. But he also understood that love is stronger than fear. I stood up and faced her directly. I want to make a deal. What kind of deal? I'll attempt the binding ritual. But first, you let me see Hannah again. Let me talk to her away from your influence without your flames whispering in her ears. Give her one chance to choose freely, with a clear mind. The woman considered this. And if she still chooses the flame? Then I'll walk into your fire willingly. My life or hers like you offered before. And if she chooses to leave with you, then you let us both go, and we'll settle this the way it was supposed to be settled, with the binding ritual during the eclipse. The woman was quiet for a long time. Around us, the fire figures had gone still, like they were waiting for orders. The glow from the burn marks fluctuated, pulsing like a heartbeat. Finally, she nodded. Agreed. But know this, Ranger Rivera. The girl has seen the truth of flame. She has felt the ecstasy of transformation. Your cold world of rules and limitations will feel like a prison to her now. Maybe, but that's her choice to make. She gestured, and the fire portal opened again. This time, instead of just seeing through it, I felt a pulling sensation, like invisible hands grabbing my chest and drawing me forward. Step through, the woman said. But remember, you have 1 hour. When you return, we will have your answer. I looked back at Hannah's campsite one more time, at all the evidence of a life interrupted and a family desperate for answers. Then I stepped into the flames. The world exploded into heat and light, and the sensation of falling through liquid fire. For a moment that felt like eternity, I was burning alive but somehow not dying, every nerve ending screaming but no actual damage being done to my body. I could feel my clothes, my skin, my hair all catching fire and being consumed. But underneath the destruction, something else was happening. I was being reborn. Then the fire spit me out onto cold stone, and I found myself in the temple of the Seta da Chama Eterna. The chamber was enormous, carved from black volcanic rock that reflected the light of hundreds of candles. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above, but I could see star patterns carved into the stone, constellations that hurt to look at directly. The air smelled of sulfur and burning sage and something else, something organic and charred that I didn't want to identify. Hannah sat on a raised platform in the center of the room, still wearing the white robe, but now I could see that the robe wasn't just decorated with symbols. It was made of symbols, threads of light woven into patterns that moved and shifted when I tried to focus on them. She looked up when I entered, and her eyes reflected the candlelight like mirrors. Ranger Rivera, I wondered if you would come. Hannah, I'm here to take you home. She stood gracefully, moving like she was underwater. Home? That's an interesting word. What makes a place home, do you think? The people who love you, I said immediately. Your family, your friends, the life you've built, the life I've built. She walked closer, and I could see that her skin had a subtle luminescence, like she was lit from within. 23 years of following other people's expectations, college because that's what smart girls do, folklore studies because it seemed safe and intellectual, a boyfriend who wanted me to be someone quieter, more conventional, a mother who loved me but never understood why I stayed up all night reading about ancient mysteries instead of planning a practical future. That doesn't mean you throw your life away, Hannah. Throw it away? She laughed, and flames flickered behind her teeth again. Ranger Rivera, I'm not throwing my life away, I'm finally living it. She gestured, and the candles around us flared brighter. In the enhanced light, I could see that we weren't alone in the chamber. Figures in white robes stood along the walls, dozens of them, all perfectly still. When I looked closer, I realized they weren't breathing. The devoted ones, Hannah said, following my gaze. People who chose transformation over limitation. They're still here, still part of the flame, but they've moved beyond the need for flesh. They're dead, Hannah. Death is just another word for change, and change is just another word for growth. She moved closer, close enough that I could feel heat radiating from her skin. The flame doesn't destroy, Ranger Rivera. It reveals. It burns away everything false and leaves only truth. And what truth has it revealed about you? Her expression grew serious. That I was never meant for the ordinary world. That my fascination with mysteries and legends and ancient powers wasn't just academic curiosity. It was recognition. I belong here, with people who understand that there are forces in the universe beyond human comprehension. Your mother understands more than you think, I said. She understands love. She understands loss. She understands what it feels like when someone you care about disappears. For the first time, Hannah's certainty wavered. My mother is sitting by her phone right now, praying for good news. She's probably looking at pictures of you, remembering when you were little, wondering what she did wrong, what she could have done differently. She didn't do anything wrong. Then don't make her spend the rest of her life believing she failed you. Hannah turned away, walking back toward the altar. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more like the college student she actually was. They showed me things, Ranger Rivera, visions of the future, of what I could become. I saw myself with power beyond imagination, connected to forces that have existed since the beginning of time. I saw myself as something more than human. And what did you see when you looked at your mother's future? She stopped walking. I didn't look. Because you already know what it looks like. She grows old wondering what happened to her daughter. She never stops hoping you'll come home. She never stops blaming herself for not saving you. The candles flickered, and for a moment the chamber felt less like a temple and more like what it probably was. A cave decorated by people trying to make the unnatural feel sacred. It's not that simple, Hannah said. I've already begun the transformation. I can feel the flame inside me, changing me, making me stronger. I don't think I can go back to being ordinary. Maybe you can't. Maybe you'll always carry something different with you now. But that doesn't mean you have to die for it. I walked closer to her, trying to project calm even though every instinct screamed that I was in mortal danger. Hannah, I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong in the ordinary world. I've spent 23 years in these mountains because civilization feels wrong somehow, like I'm wearing clothes that don't fit. But running away from the world isn't the same as finding your place in it. And what is my place? I don't know. Maybe you're meant to be the person who studies ancient mysteries and actually understands them. Maybe you're meant to be a bridge between the ordinary world and the extraordinary one. But you can't be any of those things if you're dead. She turned back to face me, and I could see tears reflecting the candlelight. They say the transformation is beautiful. That becoming flame is the most perfect joy a human can experience. Maybe it is. But joy shared is multiplied, Hannah. Joy experienced alone is just alone. We stood in silence for a long moment, surrounded by the motionless figures of people who had made the choice she was contemplating. In the candlelight, their faces looked peaceful but empty, like beautiful shells that used to contain something precious. If I leave with you, Hannah said finally, what happens to them? To the people who devoted their lives to this? I don't know, I admitted. But I know what happens if you stay. Your mother spends the rest of her life in pain, and another family learns what it feels like to lose someone they love. Hannah walked over to one of the robed figures and touched its face gently. The skin was warm but waxy, like a very realistic candle. Sister Maria, she said softly. She was the first to show me kindness when I arrived. She told me about the ecstasy of burning, about the peace that comes with surrender. Hannah's voice broke slightly. She was 17 years old when she joined the Seda in 1924. 17. A child. How many more children do they need before they're satisfied? I asked. Hannah looked around the chamber, really looking, like she was seeing it clearly for the first time. Oh God, they're all so young. Because young people are easier to convince that the ordinary world has nothing to offer them. Easier to make believe that death is just another adventure. She was crying now, flames flickering in her tears as they fell. But I've already started the process. I can feel the fire in my blood, in my bones. What if I can't stop it? Then we figure out how to live with it. Together. But we do it in the world where people love you, not in a cave filled with the bodies of children who thought they had no other choice. Hannah looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I want to go home. The chamber erupted into chaos. The robed figures around the walls suddenly moved, all turning toward us with synchronized precision. Their eyes opened, revealing flames where pupils should be. The candles flared into torches, and the temperature in the chamber shot up 20 degrees in seconds. A voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere, speaking in Portuguese but somehow understandable. The devoted one has chosen poorly. The flame is disappointed. Run, Hannah said urgently. The portal back to your world. It's behind the altar. But they won't let us reach it without a fight. The robed figures began moving toward us, no longer the peaceful sleepwalkers I'd first taken them for. They moved with purpose and speed, and I could see that their hands ended in fingers that burned like living torches. I grabbed Hannah's hand and we ran toward the altar, dodging between the advancing figures. One of them reached for me with burning fingers, and I felt the heat sear through my jacket sleeve. Another one stepped directly into our path, and I had to tackle it to get past. The body felt wrong under my hands, too light, too hollow, like hugging a scarecrow made of kindling. There! Hannah pointed toward the back of the chamber, where a circle of fire hung in the air like a doorway. Through it, I could see trees and daylight, and Hannah's abandoned campsite. We ran harder, but the figures were closing in from all sides. Just as we reached the altar, they formed a solid wall between us and the portal. The fire claims its own, one of them said in a voice like wind through a crematorium. The girl has been marked. She belongs to the flame now. Like hell she does, I said, and pulled out my service weapon. The gun worked perfectly here, no jamming or freezing like it had in the forest. I put 3 rounds center mass into the nearest figure, expecting bullets to pass harmlessly through supernatural entities. Instead, the figure stumbled backward, holes torn in its white robe, and I could see that underneath the cloth was just more cloth, layer upon layer like a mummy wrapped in burning bandages. They're not spirits, Hannah said in amazement. They're still physical, just changed. I kept firing, clearing a path toward the portal. The figures moved to intercept us, but they moved like people, not like supernatural entities. They could be shot, they could be knocked down, they could be fought. We reached the portal just as my magazine ran empty. Hannah started to step through, then stopped. The ritual, she said. Your ancestors' binding. If I leave, you'll have to face them alone. I can handle it. No, you can't. Not without help. She turned back toward the chamber. I know their weaknesses now. I know how their magic works. Let me help you. Hannah, you need to go home to your family. And you need to go home to yours. But first, we finish what your great-great-grandfather started. Before I could argue, she stepped away from the portal and walked back into the chamber. The robed figures parted to let her pass, confused by her sudden change of direction. Sister Maria, Hannah called out to the figure she'd touched earlier. You told me about the ecstasy of burning, but did you tell me about the loneliness? About spending decades as living candles, unable to truly live or truly die? The figure turned toward her. The flame is all. The flame is enough. Is it? Then why do you need new recruits every few years? Why are you always trying to convince other people to join you? Hannah's voice grew stronger, more confident. Because deep down, you know something's wrong. You know this isn't transcendence, it's just another kind of prison. Several of the figures exchanged glances. For the first time, they looked uncertain. The old ways are ending, Hannah continued. The binding your cult broke in 1934 is going to be renewed tonight, and this time it will hold until you learn to live without feeding on other people's children. The Firewalker's bloodline is weak, another figure said. The Ranger has no power to stand against us. Maybe not, I said, stepping up beside Hannah. But he doesn't have to stand alone. I thought about Emily's drawing, about Sarah's voice, about all the people over the years who I'd helped find their way home. I thought about Hannah's mother sitting by her phone, and all the other families who'd lost children to these creatures who fed on despair and dressed it up as enlightenment. I thought about the difference between being alone and being lonely, between sacrifice and suicide, between transformation and destruction, The binding requires 4 components, I said, remembering Hannah's research. Blood of the firewalker. I pulled out my pocket knife and cut a shallow line across my palm. Blood welled up, red and ordinary and human. Water from the sacred spring. Hannah pointed toward the back corner of the chamber, where water dripped from a crack in the stone wall. There, the source that feeds into the forest above. Flames from the original binding site. I looked around at the hundreds of candles. This whole chamber is built on the place where my ancestor performed the ritual. Every flame here carries that history, and the willing sacrifice of something precious. I pulled out my phone and found the photos I'd saved of Emily, my daughter at her last soccer game, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. My daughter asleep in my arms when she was 3 years old. My daughter and Sarah and me at Christmas time, back when we still looked like a family. I sacrifice my connection to the past, I said, deleting the photos one by one. My guilt over my failures, my fear of trying again, my excuse for staying disconnected from the people I love. The chamber began to shake. Wait, Hannah said urgently. That's not enough. The sacrifice has to be something that truly costs you, something that changes who you are. I thought about what would truly cost me, what would change who I was at the core, my cynicism, my burnout, my comfortable belief that nothing I did really mattered, that I was just going through the motions until retirement, my identity as someone who'd given up on hope. I sacrifice my right to stop caring, I said out loud. I sacrifice my excuse for not trying, my justification for not fighting. I sacrifice the version of myself that counts days instead of making days count. The shaking intensified. Cracks appeared in the stone walls, and several of the candles went out. But it still wasn't enough. Hannah looked at me with sudden understanding. It's not about what you sacrifice, it's about what you choose to become. She was right. The binding wasn't powered by loss. It was powered by transformation, by choosing to be something different than what you'd been before. I choose to be the ranger my great-great-grandfather was, I said. Someone who protects families, who stands between ordinary people and extraordinary dangers, someone who doesn't give up when the job gets hard. I choose to be the bridge between worlds, Hannah said. Someone who studies the mysteries but doesn't get lost in them. Someone who remembers that knowledge without compassion is just another form of cruelty. The chamber filled with light, not the red-orange light of fire, but the clean white light of dawn. The robed figures began to dissolve, their forms becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone. We choose to go home, I said, and grabbed Hannah's hand. We ran for the portal as the temple collapsed around us, stone ceiling crashing down where we'd been standing seconds before. The light grew brighter and brighter until I couldn't see anything except white brilliance and the sensation of Hannah's hand in mine. Then we were falling through space and time and possibility, tumbling through the gap between what was and what could be, until we hit solid ground and rolled apart in a tangle of limbs and pine needles. I opened my eyes to find myself lying on normal forest floor, surrounded by normal trees, under a normal October sky. My radio was crackling with normal chatter from dispatch. My phone showed normal signal bars and normal battery life. Hannah lay a few feet away, no longer wearing a white robe but back in her hiking clothes from the day before. She sat up slowly, looking around in amazement. "We're really back," she said. "Yeah, we're back." She looked at her hands, turning them over like she was seeing them for the first time. "I can still feel it, the fire, but it's different now. It's mine, not theirs." I helped her to her feet. "What do you want to do with it?" "Learn about it, study it, figure out how to use it to help people instead of just burning them." She smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, it was a completely human smile with no flames behind it. "I think I know what my real thesis is going to be about now." I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Unit 23. I have the missing person. Hannah Miller is alive and uninjured, requesting immediate medical evaluation and transport." "Unit 23, outstanding. What was her condition when found?" I looked at Hannah, who was brushing pine needles out of her hair and looking like any other college student who'd spent an unexpected night camping. She's going to be just fine, I said. Better than fine. As we walked back toward the trailhead where I'd left my truck, Hannah asked, "What about your family? Are you going to call them?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Sarah's number. This time I didn't hesitate before hitting the call button. "Sarah, it's Marcus. I found the missing girl. She's safe. But I was wondering, would it be okay if I came by tonight? I'd like to see Emily's drawing. I'd like to see you both." "Marcus, what's gotten into you?" I looked back at the forest where impossible things had happened, where I'd learned the difference between giving up and letting go, between sacrifice and surrender. "I remembered who I used to be," I said, "and I decided I want to be him again." 3 hours later, I was sitting at Sarah's kitchen table looking at Emily's crayon drawing of our family camping together. Every detail was perfect. The tent I'd taught her to set up, the campfire I'd shown her how to build safely, the stars I'd helped her identify on clear nights. "It's beautiful, kiddo," I told her. "Want to plan a real camping trip, just you and me and Mom?" Emily looked at Sarah for permission, then back at me with eyes that were cautious but hopeful. "You promise you won't be too busy with work?" "I promise I'll make time for the things that matter." And as I hugged my daughter and felt her small arms wrap around my neck with complete trust, I knew I was going to keep that promise. The fire that Hannah had carried back from the other world wasn't the only thing that had been transformed. I had been transformed too. From a burned-out ranger counting days until retirement, into someone who remembered that every day was a gift, every rescue mattered, every family deserved to be whole. The Seta da Chama Eterna had taught me something after all, not about the ecstasy of burning, but about the joy of choosing to keep burning for the right reasons. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed clutching the new camping gear I'd promised to buy her, Sarah and I sat on the porch watching the lunar eclipse paint the sky red. "You really are different," she said quietly. "Different how?" "Like you remembered how to hope." I took her hand, amazed when she didn't pull away. "I remembered that hope is a choice, and I'm choosing to hope that we can find our way back to each other." She squeezed my fingers. "It won't be easy. We have a lot to work through. The best things never are easy, but they're worth fighting for." As the eclipse reached totality and the moon turned the color of fire, I felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't experienced in years. Peace, purpose, the knowledge that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do, protecting the people I loved, keeping families together, standing between the ordinary world and the forces that would destroy it, being the ranger I was always meant to be. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Hannah Grace Miller in that fire temple. I read every single one.